Castle Duckula, home for many centuries to a dreadful dynasty of vicious vampire ducks, the Counts of Duckula. Legend has it that these foul beings can be destroyed by a stake through the heart or exposure to sunlight. This does not suffice, however, for they may be brought back to life by means of a secret rite that can be performed once a century when the moon is in the 8th house.
Wing blood.
Are you getting? The latest reincarnation did not run according to plan.
The EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome to EscapeGoat Podcast, episode 51. After a little gap there, this is kind of back for an informal autumn or fall special. And it's probably just a little bit too late to be a Halloween special, or certainly will be by the time I've actually got around to editing it in hopefully about a week. But it has a slightly Halloween-y tinge, both from what's been on our minds recently when we're recording at the very start of November, just after Halloween, and some of the subject matter as well. So for this kind of special episode, before we come back with a full series in the new year sometime, I'd like to welcome back two people who've been on the show before, but not together at the same time. Firstly, my brother Matt. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm very good, thank you, dude. Looking forward to this chat.
Should be a good one. And also welcoming back George. How are you doing?
All good. Thank you, David.
Fantastic. Well, I'd just like to ask, firstly, I guess starting with Matt, how was your Halloween? And indeed, how was your sort of October build-up to Halloween, which is obviously the most fun bit?
Well, me and my wife have had a baby daughter in the last 4 weeks. She's now 4.5 weeks old. So I have literally spent the last 4 weeks with a lovely little baby girl on my lap watching as many horror films as I possibly can, with her facing the other way.
Yeah, which is fine, right? The parenting manual says it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, you can watch anything until they're about 3 and a bit.
Yeah.
So right.
It doesn't do them any harm at all.
No.
Sure, and then that's it. On the other hand, maybe it's a case of start them young, right? It's like the Catholic Church or the cigarette industry, you know?
Well, I'll go for the cigarette industry over the Catholic Church, but I know what you mean. Yeah, and but it's. I mean, it could be a case of also subliminally, all this stuff is going in.
That's what I'm thinking.
I hope not, because I want to
little
say
horror writer or horror film creator in the making.
Yes, I hope so.
You're genetically engineering the perfect horror.
It's like Jim Carrey, in Batman Forever. Like, it's just all going into her head. But no, it's been an absolute joy. So I've been watching everything from the new Hellraiser, the new Halloween. I've been watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Don't Look Now.
Oh,
Night of the
wow.
Living Dead.
I've just been watching classics and new films of horror. So, yeah, I mean, I watch horror all the time anyway. So, I mean, Halloween is just kind of, I just ramp it up to 11, really.
Yeah, I might have mentioned, George, like, interested as that I am in horror, Matt is kind of the horror guy in our family, so that's who you're dealing with tonight.
Fantastic. My people, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, I want to hear more about that. I know you mentioned Hellraiser there, Matt, and minor spoilers for the podcast ahead. We will be touching on the recent 2022 Hellraiser. But George, same question. How's it been going?
It's actually been a really good Halloween, to be perfectly honest. Been incredibly busy. Halloween's a busy period for any horror writer. It's a massively busy period, so there's lots been going on. But like Matt, really, what I've been doing is watching lots and lots and lots of horror films in the run-up to Halloween itself. Discovered some absolute beauties, I've got to say. I mean, I'm shocked to my core. The 2018 remake of Suspiria.
Oh, the Tom York did the music, was it? Yeah.
Really damn good.
Really? No way.
I had avoided it for the longest time. I'd avoided it, but it was there, and it was something I hadn't seen before, so I watched it kind of under sufferance. I loved it.
Wow.
couldn't believe it.
How is it good? I don't mean that in a cheap way. How could it be when it's trying to do a Dario Argento film?
Well, that's just it. It's not. That's the genius of it. It is not trying to do a Dario Argento film. It takes the base premise of the original film, the base situation, and then creates something completely different out of it. It is entirely its own work, and that is its strength. I mean, I love the original. The original Suspiria, one of my benchmark horror films. I absolutely love it to bits. This is a beast of a different order. It doesn't even attempt to reinvent the wheel. It tries to be something different. In fact, you know what, the closest analog I can think of is something like Don't Look Now. That's what it feels like watching. It's like it's trying to homage 1970s European cinema. And it works an absolute treat. I was shocked at my own reaction to it. So discovered a wonderful new horror film, which is ironically quite an old horror film now, by the standards of the industry. But sometimes it's nice to be wrong.
Well, that's one to engage with as soon as possible for me. I was messaging Matt yesterday, and the actual final movie of October that I watched in a long run of them was me and my partner came back home at a reasonable hour and had time to watch another movie, and so we decided to finish off Halloween proper with the original Amityville Horror, which I'd never seen.
The 1970s.
Yes. Josh Brolin.
The 1970
James Brolin, sorry.
James Brolin, yeah. I think I said the same thing when I first saw it, yeah. And Margot Kidder. Yeah. So I'd never seen it before, and it's funny because a few days ago I watched the first, the original Treehouse of Horror, the Simpsons one, and it has that segment where the Simpsons move into a haunted house and it's going, "Get out," and the walls are bleeding.
Homaging the Amityville Horror.
Yeah, right? that and Poltergeist, right? Where the house folds up at the end, and all that. But I was kind of, I don't know, I wasn't let down because Amityville Horror has a slightly problematic reputation, but partly by the behind the scenes stuff about why it was made in the first place and things like that, which I was having fun reading up about today. But I was I was intrigued by the atmosphere of it. Definitely, I thought that worked well.
In and of itself, if you remove it from context, the fact that George Lutz is a complete con artist and very likely an abusive person, it's a very good piece of work, isn't it? It's a very good haunted house story, right? Atmosphere. It's got that wonderful sort of patina of dirt that a lot of good horror has, or it feels filthy. It feels spiritually filthy, which is cool. We like that from horror. It's decent. Of course, within context, it is slightly problematic, but what are you going to do? Yeah.
I absolutely love the Amityville Horror. I really like the Jay Anson book as well. I've probably read it about 12 times or something like that. And what I love about it is I'm not a believer in ghosts and the supernatural. However, what I loved about it was the idea that, if George Lutz, was full of shit and he ran away, he literally left all of his possessions and his business behind, and basically gambled it on this one, kind of thing that this book had to sell, because then so for me it's that thing of like,
so
I
it's
don't
so
believe
unhinged that if it and it seems like it is complete bullshit, it's almost more admirable. Like
it's more admirable, almost more admirable, yeah. And also on a side note, the director of Halloween 3: Season of the Witch wrote the sequel to it, which is called Amityville 2: The Possession. And I don't know if you've seen that one, guys, but I think it's actually a superior horror movie.
It's the one that shows you the history of the house, right?
Yeah, so we go back to the what they called the family that had it, not the Lutzes, but the DeFeo.
That's it.
Yeah, the DeFeos.
Yeah, it's a very difficult family situation to begin with, isn't it?
And even better than, can I just plug one more movie? Sorry, just while I'm on the Amityville thing.
Are you getting paid by the movie that you plug?
By the eyes. Get out. There's a documentary which is actually probably my top 3 documentaries of all time, and it's called My Amityville Horror. And it sounds very cheesy title, whatever, but it's the story of Daniel Lutz, who was one of the kids who was in the house when the possession, quote unquote, haunting happened. And it's just a really, really melancholy, sad documentary about how much this quote unquote true story has affected this boy's life. And he's now basically like a disgruntled 50-year-old man, who has just had to live this life. And
I can imagine, because it would follow you around, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you're the Amityville kid.
legendary at
You
the
know.
time. I mean, like, that house has become iconic not only throughout the US, but even here and throughout Europe, right?
Yeah.
People remember that house.
Absolutely.
It's called Daniel, did you say?
I think it was Daniel Lutz. I've got the DVD up there, but
I'll fact check that. But if it is called Daniel, that would make a really interesting double bill with Doctor Sleep, wouldn't it? Because they're the two child to adults traumatized survivors of the haunted houses.
Danny boy.
Except this one's real.
Yeah. So it's well worth checking out. Anyway, people definitely watch Amityville 2 and watch My Amityville Horror, released in about 2014, I think it was.
Yeah, I will check that out. I haven't seen the documentary, but it sounds interesting.
It's very interesting.
Fascinating. Well, before we just chat about the 2022 Hellraiser a little bit, I just wanted to mention one last thing, which is that the penultimate horror film I watched in the October season was we went to the cinema to watch The Thing.
Original.
And I've seen that. There would be not the original. I got caught out there. The early 80s.
Sorry, my bad.
And I have seen it many times before, so I know you both have. And but I'd never seen it at the cinema. And I think, as with any great movie, and I think part of the way great movies prove themselves is you can watch them, kind of an obvious truism, but you can watch them again and different facets reveal themselves, or you fixate on a different facet for fairly arbitrary reasons. But without dragging us into the whole morass of discussing The Thing, which again, George has spoken at length about this online, so I'll link to that in the show notes. Yes. The aspect that I guess I focus on the most this time is, and you guys can correct me on this, because we've all seen it a lot. I think, although they talk as the nature of the entity that is The Thing reveals itself gradually, the more intelligent, perceptive characters in the doc, etc. They talk about how it emulates living beings and how it can become perhaps an indistinguishable copy and all that sort of stuff. I don't think they ever actually explicitly, even the more perceptive characters, I don't think they ever actually explicitly say, if you are the Thing, you might not know you're the Thing.
No, they don't. And that's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating? What if you don't know?
Yes.
Up until the point of your reveal, because that would be the most perfect disguise, wouldn't it?
I always kind of read it that they did know. That was the kind of thing, but they were just very, very good at acting and sort of hiding it, which makes it, for me...
They're undercover agents, essentially.
Yeah. It makes it more creepy that they have such an understanding of the human brain that they, in a weird way that they can act really well. And then I love when they start to transform, it just all goes out the window. That's what I love, and they just freeze.
All self-control.
Yes.
Yeah. Gone. On a cellular level, right? Yeah. There's not even any distinct shape or form when they lose it, is there? They just erupt.
Yeah.
And he's just looking forward, just like when he's in the chair and he just starts vibrating and just like looking forward, and it's just there's just nothing there anymore. That's so cool.
David, I envy you seeing it at the cinema. I really do.
Well, I mean, the effects alone, obviously, the big screen allows you to be properly entranced by them, and that never gets old, especially for all the big set piece. What the hell is happening now? Kind of moments. But
did you have that moment at the beginning where you thought Predator completely ripped off this intro?
Oh, yeah, it is almost still, isn't it?
Yes, it really is.
Before the credits, but I think the reason I mentioned the sort of nature of how they perceive themselves, even when they are transformed, when they're verifiably the Thing, do they know that they're the Thing? Is it possible for them to reach a stage of emulation where they don't know they're the Thing? The reason I focused on it this time was watching the protracted blood test scene, because obviously there's a few stages to that, and the last person they successfully test is Childs. I was watching his performance, and he plays it like he's not sure how this is going to go.
Yeah,
and I think his test is certainly negative. So at that stage, if we're to take the test as having validity, he isn't. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't, in that actor's performance, he conveys he's not really sure. And he is one of the more intelligent characters, I think. So I was like, that's interesting, isn't it? It's like some of them are cottoning on to the fact that they seem wary of their own minds, even if they think they aren't the Thing,
I mean, if they were going to do a sequel to The Thing, which I know they kind of did, which was garbage, but if they were going to do a sincere sequel to The Thing, that might be an interesting way to take it, of amping up the paranoia, so it becomes an existential paranoia. It's not about the other, it's about the self. How do I know I'm not? How can you ever be sure that I'm not? That would be fascinating.
And that links to racism and bigotry and things as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely fascinating, right?
For me, one of the the sort of self-help tips that I get from The Thing is that, did you know John Carpenter was fired from his next movie because The Thing was so awful? the thing was perceived as a bad movie.
Yes,
so
it didn't do well, did it, on its original release?
It didn't do well. The critics hated it. It did badly. And so there, John Carpenter had a project lined up that he was subsequently fired from. So if you can get fired for making The Thing, you know what I mean, then there's no hope. There's no hope for anyone, is there? You know what I mean?
This industry is arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
Completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
Did it open like the same weekend as E.T. or something ridiculous like that?
You probably lost E.T. a bit, didn't it? Yeah.
I feel like it was very proximate anyway.
That's true. No, it's true. Yeah.
And then
audiences and critics responded to the more sort of schmaltzy, saccharine.
Yeah, that's what was happening.
I don't really like E.T.
No, me. I'll be honest. I'm not a fan.
Never
he's
really been
certainly
a fan.
scarier than The Thing.
That's true.
Inadvertently so.
I think the last 15 minutes is incredible of E.T. because it plays. You can turn the dialogue off and you just have the amazing soundtrack, and it plays like an opera. But the rest of the movie, I think it's really strangely paced, and like I don't think it's a good movie, to be honest.
Hot take.
There you go.
It's not my favorite. I'll be honest. It's never. I know we're of the generation when we're all supposed to love it and identify with it, but.
Yeah,
not so much.
Whereas I actually think Close Encounters plays as a pretty good horror movie for the most part. I saw that recently, like about a year ago, and I was for the first time in ages, and I was like, there is all the optimistic, Eyes to the Sky wonder of Spielberg and all that cliche stuff, but it's really creepy. Close Encounters for most of it.
He leaves his
really
family at the end,
Oh, that too. The moral stuff is weird, but yeah, it's just really unnerving as well,
Yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, talking of unnerving, we did say we'd talk a little bit about the recent 2022 Hellraiser, and I mentioned I will link in the show notes to a sort of fairly recent take that George had where you came out of seeing it, didn't you? And you recorded about sort of 25 minutes. I did
indeed. I had to because Hellraiser is one of my franchises. It's Clive Barker's, and Clive Barker is basically kind of the reason I write. He is one of my favorite creators in practically any genre, so I had to talk about the new Hellraiser, and I liked it very much. I've got to say, it's a very different take on the mythology, and it's aesthetically very different from the films that have gone before, but that's massively to its benefit. It's an interesting reinvention, and by all accounts, it is going forward. There is going to be another film in the series, so I'm fascinated to see where they go with it from this point on.
Well, I am too. I mean, I think given that we've got your thoughts, available to the listeners, George, in a sort of full form, I guess I'll focus more on what me and Matt made of it, and you can kind of react to whether you agree with that or not, or to what he said.
Yeah, no worries.
I mean, Matt, just before you get into that, do you want to tell George very briefly, just in a minute or so, like what your recent experience or lifelong experience with Clive Barker has been, and what recently you've been exploring?
I'm a huge fan of Clive Barker, mainly through The Forbidden and Candyman. I think that's his masterpiece. A movie I know was not was directed by Bernard Rose, but it was obviously based on The Forbidden by Clive Barker from one of his books.
And Barker
of blood.
was heavily involved by all accounts. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, he was, and I think that there is something about his writing that just completely touches a nerve with me, and I just love it. And like I've not written. I mean, obviously, I know you're very accomplished in your writing. I've just started writing some short horror stories, and I've been writing about the three of the same stories, like, and adding to them for about 2 years now. But every time I pick up the pen and write, I'm writing in his voice. I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but
it's hard not to, isn't it? When you've come across him, his writing. I mean, I've spoken about this at length with our mutual friend Kit. He is of another order of magnitude when it comes to his writing. He just is. There was nobody around at the time, and I don't think there's many people around now writing to the same degree, at the same quality, about the same depth and breadth of ideas as he does.
Yeah. Well, he was really pushing boundaries as well in that era. I think that sort of mid 80s to like the mid 90s. And I've got an audiobook of Hellraiser, The Hellbound Heart, which is what the original Hellraiser is based on. And if when I'm writing something in a short story, if I can't hear Clive Barker say it in his lovely, sweet Liverpudlian Californian accent,
I was going to say, not quite English.
Not quite English. Yeah. If I can't hear it coming out of his mouth, then it's like it doesn't. I don't. So yeah, I absolutely love him. The film, I was so excited to see it. It was really like built up for a long time, and when we finally got round to watching it, I wasn't disappointed. I thought it was the best sequel to Hellraiser. I might even include the second movie in that, because I'm not as big a fan of the second movie as a lot of people are. I think some of the acting and the special effects is so shonky that it just doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of bad special effects in the first one, but there's more good special effects in the first one, if you know what I mean. Like, Frank coming out the floor is just amazing.
Spectacular, right?
And there's great scenes in the second one, but as a movie, I've never really loved it. So this felt like, to me, like a true. I wouldn't even say it does feel like a reboot. It doesn't feel like a sequel. It's obviously not set in the same kind of. There's not none of the same characters, but. I thought it was brilliant. I thought the music was fantastic. The Cenobites were amazing. The flesh, the way that I only just noticed recently in concept drawings that the Hell Priest, her dress is basically like made of skin.
It's made of skin.
The skin from the legs has been flayed to make a dress, and I was just like,
I really liked that element,
cool.
because like aesthetically and thematically, that removes them from the original Cenobites. I mean, the original Cenobites have this whole sort of like, they are a mixture of BDSM and papal imagery just sort of mashed together, and it works really well for them, right?
Yeah.
But they've done something different here, and I'm really pleased that they have. It removes them from the originals and makes them something unique. It makes it something interesting. The color palette, right? I mean, like because of that decision, the whole color palette has changed. It's got more of like a Dario Argento kind of thing going on.
It's more browns, isn't it? Browns and reds.
Beautiful stuff. I've got to say, I was very impressed with the new Cenobites, and Jamie Clayton as the Hell Priest. I mean, she's just
extraordinary.
I mean, amazing, right? Absolutely amazing.
And it was nice to see Doug Bradley say such nice things about her on Twitter
as well. And Clive as well.
And Clive,
the panel that she did with Clive, because he doesn't do that many at the moment. Obviously, still recovering from his very, very long illness. But he did say that seeing it has made him want to write Hellraiser stories again, and he was out. He was out. He's
literally said, "I don't want to talk about that anymore." He was literally saying that wasn't he?
I've had enough of this franchise. But apparently, watching the new one and seeing Jamie's performance kind of made him want to write again in that mythology. So
what better praise can you get than that?
Exactly.
You've literally awoken Clive Barker's brain into the Hellraiser series again.
Yeah. She was in bits, Jamie was. She didn't know how to respond to that. How would you? I mean, like, it is an amazing thing to say, isn't it? What a compliment.
Welcome to the sisterhood, brotherhood of the horror icons, What a nice thing.
What did you guys think of like the new mythology where the box has different configurations and whatnot?
Can I start? I mean, I liked it, but can I start you off on a pub quiz of can you remember any of the configurations other than the Lament and the Leviathan?
There was Lament. Leviathan was the last one, wasn't there?
I've got them in front of me, I should say.
Love was one of them.
Yeah, so they call that the Laudurant configuration.
Laudurant, yeah. Law was one of them, I believe.
Yeah, you're doing very well. That's knowledge, apparently.
Yeah.
Wow.
What was the other one?
There is one that has a plot purpose, I guess. There's towards the end.
What did he request? Like, it wasn't the Leviathan, it was that, when he got that horrible...
sensuality, wasn't it? It was sensuality.
Yeah, so he got his senses plucked, yeah.
That's the liminal configuration.
Yes!
So the one that's actually plot contained is the Lazarus configuration. Which I think she sort of rejects at the end, doesn't she? Because her brother's gone, So it's massive spoilers for Hellraiser 2022.
Yeah, massive.
I'll put that before.
But yeah, she kind of understands that, like, it won't be what she wants. It will be a different version of what she wants. I mean, what I like about it as well is that the film throws in ambiguities. Like, she says that. She says, whatever you give is tainted. But it's not really, is it? Because, like, you get that final sequence where, what's his name? I can't remember what his name is, but there's a kind of Chenard equivalent.
Yeah, Dr. Chenard guy.
He gets what he wants, right? He gets something quite amazing, actually, something almost beautiful.
Yeah, and the way that's portrayed as well, like a kind of weird religious tableau. It's like something like one of the Cremaster cycle things or something.
The way he like ascends to heaven, sort of thing. Ascends to hell.
That's another thing about this movie. So it really does. It's one of the only films in the Hellraiser series, barring Hellraiser 2, that has anything about the mythology of Leviathan in it. Which, yes. Thank Leviathan for that. But Leviathan, as it occurs in this film, feels like a genuine god, doesn't it? It feels like a genuine divinity, and that, so pleased. So pleased about that.
Well, my favourite thing about the extended lore, and it comes down to these configurations, is I really, again, spoilers, but I really, really like the ending, and I don't think it's kind of obvious what they're saying without being heavy-handed. I think she chooses, not to paraphrase Hugh McGregor, she chooses life, right? They strongly suggest, without quite fully saying it, like everyone's life is the lament configuration.
Right.
It's the lament configuration, and they equate lament with regret, which is a kind of thematically beautiful thing.
It's a really smart movie when you really analyze it like this, and because I hadn't really put much thought into the configurations, which is actually quite obviously a major part of it. One of the ambiguities that I liked was what happened to her brother. Because I thought that was really cool, the way you see him in that one room, when she kind of like hears his voice and goes through, and then I guess you have to assume that he's either just dead or he's like in the Hell Priest's grasp. But the way that's not really resolved, I thought that was really quite creepy, and stuff.
Very analogous to Larry from the original film, of course.
Yes.
In that regard.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's not start talking about Larry. If we start talking about Andrew Robinson, we're definitely.
But isn't it nice to see some LGBTQ characters in what is effectively a Clive Barker franchise? Yay!
Well, they were almost in the weird parenting role, weren't they? Because they're it's her brother, looking after her, and he's a partner, and it's kind of she's recovering, obviously, and is that kind of young damaged character. So yeah, I guess LGBTQ representation, and also kind of in interesting plot dynamics. Not just the wisecracking gay best friend.
Yes. Oh God. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Enough of those stereotypes, please. Enough.
Well, it kind of works because it's not really part of the plot. That's kind of what's good about it. Is it's just the fact that it's just included. It's like without any kind of, it just
they just are people, which is yes. Thank you.
So I've got a fun question to just bridge the gap into the main meat of our topic here, which is something that I was thinking about, because I thought I went off a tangent. I was like, what other stories can you insert the Cenobites into and make it kind of interesting? And I thought, I think my start-off choice there is Groundhog Day. You can have the Cenobite, whether you reveal that as like part of Leviathan's torment, because obviously, famously, the Groundhog Day trap that Bill Murray finds himself in isn't revealed, but it seemed to be something about coming to terms with your own identity and suffering, and people have made like Buddhist readings of Groundhog Day and all that kind of stuff.
Well, what's fascinating is thematically you can make the same readings of Hellraiser, right? Of the Hellraiser mythology. That's often what happens to people who go through the whole of Leviathan's mythology, who become the Cenobites. They realize there is a transcendent element to it, right? You realize something about your own identity, and then you become more than that. You become something. You effloresce. You flower into some other state of being.
I'm just trying to think how we can include shots of the Cenobites into Groundhog Day now. How we can use After Effects to just plant like Pinhead in the background.
I reckon the entire B&B that he's staying in is just run by Cenobites. It's never commented on. It's just like running the breakfast buffet.
It is a corner of Leviathan's hell somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe he looks up at the sun one day and you just see the Leviathan in the sky or something like that.
The obvious link is the fact that repetition is hell, right? Or hell is repetition.
Yeah.
It's the same thing over and over and over and over again until it becomes unendurable. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys are also allowed to put the Cenobites into another narrative, and what is that?
After you.
Good question. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because like the tendency is to try to mix them with some other horror franchise, and I know that has been on the cards before, and quite frankly, thank Leviathan that never happened. They are. It's a difficult one. I mean,
I've got one
in a jokey way. Any number of things. Go on.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There we go. Very nice.
We have such Bedford Falls to show you.
well good.
Yeah,
I like
it.
That every time a Cenobite gets its wings. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's great. I love the idea of Doug Bradley like showing James Stewart around a town and like pointing out where it could have gone differently. You could have left. Your brother didn't have to be the one who left. I could have taken him.
Yeah.
Like the inverse of It's a Wonderful Life, where Pinhead is showing someone how happy everyone is without them, that their life really is execrable and miserable and worthless.
Yeah. We're basically remaking Blackadder's Christmas Carol, really, aren't we? We're just kind of turning a popular wholesome myth on its head. And,
pretty much.
Yeah. So I'd like to basically get a conversation started about something that me and Matt have, and I believe George too, has been long-term fans of. And once again, George, it's something you've touched on elsewhere on your YouTube channel, at least tangentially, because we're going to be talking about specific work from a British animation studio, but also, doubtless touching on some of its other work, which you've done a video doing exactly that very thing, which I'll link.
We did.
You did, and that show primarily is Count Duckula, which, I mean,
the name alone, right?
I was going to say requires no introduction.
Alone.
I think we have a fairly niche audience. It is a British children's animation show, which I think ran from roughly 1988 to 1993.
Yeah, quite a while, right? Quite a long time for a British cartoon.
Yeah, 4 series, like little minor gaps in production, I think particularly between series 3 and 4.
Wasn't Cosgrove Hall itself dissolving at that point?
Well, so I think there were definitely things about that around, because for anyone, Count Duckula was made for ITV, independent television in the UK, and without something like Alan Partridge, this was getting into the time when all the ITV regions amalgamated, and because it was shown. I think it was shown on Thames Television primarily, commissioned by Thames Television. We'll get into Cosgrove Hall, the actual animation studio, a little bit more in a bit. But I think that early 90s kind of tail end of Duckula would have coincided with all those franchises kind of folding into one another and wrapping up. And so I think that was some of the production difficulty. I've also read that David Jason, who provides the voice primarily of Count Duckula and quite a lot of other voices in this, was getting into doing A Touch of Frost, the well-remembered middle-of-the-road ITV detective drama show. So I think he was recording the final series of Duckula concurrently with Touch of Frost, which is kind of insane.
I literally thought you were going to say he was clinically fed up of doing the voice. That's where I thought you were going.
There was going to be a bit more tension.
He was sick of it.
Oh, like he wanted to sort of like Conan Doyle, like he's obsessed with killing off Duckula. Do you think?
Yeah. Wouldn't that have been great? To be honest, wouldn't that have been awesome?
So yeah, I mean, George, me and Matt have some sort of like, to get the lead up front. Me and Matt grew up in South Manchester, which I think I mentioned on one of our podcasts before, and we grew up in as much in the sort of shadow of Cosgrove Hall, in the neighbourhood of the animation studio Cosgrove Hall, as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory does with Willy Wonka's estate. So we've got some sort of personal memories and associations. But would you just like to tell us briefly what Cosgrove Hall kind of meant to you growing up and what you liked?
Oh, well, it's one of those strange things that's always been there. It's always been ambient, because I was born in 1984. So Danger Mouse, for example, was already well established on UK media by that point, along with lots of other little bits and pieces that Cosgrove Hall did, which were just there. It's one of those strange things where I don't remember a time before it. I mean, part of me seems to remember Count Duckula starting, but that was in 1988, so I would have been 4 years old. My most abiding memories of Count Duckula are it being an after-school thing. So that's what I remember most. I remember coming home from school. It would have been infant school at that point, so I would have been very, very young, and watching Count Duckula episodes on CITV. Oh yeah, already loving horror by that point, already being immersed in quite a lot of horror by that point. Something ostensibly about vampires. Well in. But beyond that, just finding it really funny. Just phenomenally funny. And having gone back to it, because I've seen bits and pieces of it as an adult, but I haven't gone back and watched a significant chunk of it as I did for this podcast. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
it's absolutely hilarious, and the range of humor in it too. So it's a cartoon, so there's loads of like visual humor and slapstick and whatnot. But what got me this time was how many references it pays to stuff that's very, very of its era, but also completely British. Most people will not understand the references that this thing is making. There are references to Carry On films and to things like Fawlty Towers, and there are parodies of things like Fawlty Towers, which, you know, most people will not understand. It's really, really wonderful. I like how esoteric it can get with its references.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned to you, Matt, didn't I, that in that first episode I put in the sort of document we were all having a look at, you know, the kind of unbroadcast pilot, you know, the first thing they actually produced. Igor references Bela Lugosi within a minute.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's that kind of thing as like, you know, you just accept that when you're a kid, you just accept the world with which you're presented, in a cartoon like Count Duckula that is so brilliant and, like you say, so esoteric and so kind of was so smart. You know, that's the thing, is that, you know, you don't know any different. It's only when you get older and you analyse it and you look into it and you realise how unique and how sort of, you know, non-pandering it was. You know, it's just the way, they threw in these references to, you know, adult sitcoms and to the Universal horror movies and things like that. That you just kind of, it was just educating you. It was just kind of like subliminally educating you about these things.
Not in a sort of didactic way either. It's not hitting you like a lot of shows from the era did, by the way, that claimed to be educational. They were so moral and simplistic and didactic about it. You know, there was no subtlety to them at all. This doesn't do that. It's all part of the aesthetic, isn't it? So the Universal horror and Hammer horror is just baked into the DNA of this thing, right? It's just Gothicism. Gothicism itself is baked into the DNA of this show. And what I love is the way it lampoons it. So you get the announcer in every episode who feels like he's from a different show. He's like Igor, isn't he? He wants you to believe that you're going to watch something that's absolutely horrific, and his voice is amazing, right? He's got such a poetic turn, and of course when you actually get into the show, it's a ditzy cartoon. It's brilliant.
Also, Count Duckula's he's a vegetarian for a start, and I know that's the whole thing, it's like fish out of water, but he's still a count and he still lives in a castle,
and he's still a vampire.
He's still a vampire.
He's still got all of like the properties of a vampire, sans drinking blood.
Yeah, he basically just doesn't want to kill anyone and doesn't want to murder anyone. But he basically enjoys being a count. There's nothing in it that says he wants to give up the castle or give up, having money or any of that stuff. So it's kind of a strange.
And fame. He's really into fame, which I think apparently they get from his characterization as the villain in Danger Mouse. From his origins.
Yes, because that's where he originally appeared, right, as a villain in Danger Mouse.
Yeah,
he wants money. He wants money. He wants to be on television, and he wants not to be in Transylvania anymore.
Well, that's another thing that got me about this rewatch. The characterization of Count Duckula. Now you get from Igor and from certain episodes where his ancestors turn up, you get an idea of what the previous incarnations of Duckula have been like. And for those who don't know, the reason he's a vegetarian, and the reason he is the way he is because this particular reincarnation didn't work. It went wrong.
Yeah.
This latest incarnation did not go according to plan.
It went down according to plan. No.
They used ketchup instead of blood.
Exactly, and it went very wrong, and it resulted in this slightly fey, narcissistic, anxious little guy who ostensibly happens to be a vampiric Transylvanian count as well, but doesn't want to be. He wants to be something complete. He wants to be famous, doesn't he? He wants to be a movie star or a rock star or something to that effect.
That's his downfall, isn't it? Because he's not content with the fact that he's like a millionaire aristocrat.
Well, that's a good juncture. George, did it remind you at all of Titus Grown?
Actually, yeah. And in fact, the way they portray the castle is very Gormenghast-like, isn't it? I mean, it's great. The design of the castle itself is wonderful. I love the way it's like, its structure is inverted, so it gets thinner the further down you get. It's like there's been add-ons and contusions over the centuries.
I love the sheer scale of it as well. When you see the entrance hall, you get the feeling that it's huge, don't you? You really get this kind of cavernous idea. And I remember being fascinated by the design of it and all the corridors. And I mean, it used to, because one of the episodes that me and David had a VHS tape, and I think how many episodes was on that tape, David? Was it about 4?
Well, we had a few, but I've actually got one of them. I wonder if you guys could see this. I don't know what my camera's doing in terms of focus,
that's the one.
That's one of the ones we had handy, which has 3 of the episodes on that I put on the Google Docs that we were looking at. So you've got the Wax Museum one, the Lost Valley, which is a masterpiece, the Return of the Curse of the Secret of Mummy's Tomb meets Frankenduckula's Monster, etc.
Well, that was the one.
We had Castle McDuckula, Castle McDuckula on the VHS as well. Which our Scottish grandparents particularly enjoyed us putting on when we were up there.
I can imagine. I can well imagine.
Where are you
I
free?
recall having a VHS that had what is it? No Sax, Please We're Egyptian.
Oh
I
yeah,
believe that was
the
the first broadcast episode.
Awesome episode. I mean, like, first of all, the pun of the title is fantastic, and also a bit close to the knuckle, right?
Bit risque, yeah.
A little bit risque, but that's a joke they would repeat in the titles throughout the seasons, right? They would do puns on No Sex Please We're British all the way through.
Is that the one where they did Ooh Rah and Up She Rises?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yes,
I
remember
that.
Full of those. It's full of puns. Like, you've got the two Egyptian priests who are named Who Mighty You Be.
Yeah.
And you just know where it's going. From the minute they occur, you know where that's going.
Yeah.
And of course, you get the pharaoh called Upshi,
Yeah.
who happens to look like Nanny.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Well, actually, that's perfect, George, because you were talking about the different kinds of humour to find within it. And me and Matt used to go to the pantomime all the time in Edinburgh, mostly, but that used to be a family ritual, going to pantomime. Rewatching quite a lot of these episodes, we're not doing like a detailed episode by episode here or anything, but I thought it was.
There's too many for one thing.
There's too many and they're too good. But a lot of the humour in it, Matt, it really reminded me of pantomime routines, and there's that kind of Abbott and Costello stuff as well. There's that kind of those back and forth, linguistic traps that people fall into. It was very much like that because a lot of that pantomime stuff has esoteric references, but also has people doing pretty idiosyncratic performances and calls on all kinds of kind of tropes and stuff and cheesy jokes and, as you say, slightly risque jokes. And it's funny you mentioned Carry On as well, George, because there's a whole bunch of that kind of British strain of humour in there as well, isn't there?
It's that very sort of soft British humour that you used to get from stuff like The Goodies and whatnot as well, which is a huge influence here, stuff that isn't necessarily like sharp or offensive, that's quite palatable and translates well into a cartoon. So things like Silly Voices and one of which there are many, obviously, and the raw physical humor. So one of the things that made me laugh consistently, and it has done ever since I was a kid, is the fact that Nanny doesn't know how to use doors.
Nanny, use the door. I love that. And I can't think of stock taking. If anyone says the phrase stock taking, I can't think of that without saying stock breaking, more like.
That's a good one.
Thank you. But yeah, there's certain things, and we called our grandma her Nanny because of the show.
Because of the show.
Because of the show. Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's kind of true. I think I'd started calling it something similar, and it sort of got moulded into Nanny by watching too much Duckula. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So like literally changed our vocabulary.
Fantastic. One thing I'd forgotten from being a kid watching it was Nanny's sling.
Yeah.
She's always got her arm in a sling, and there's stuff inside of it.
Yeah.
Like, there are episodes where it's like the TARDIS or like a bag of holding.
Mary Poppins.
She will bring out like breakfast tables and full breakfasts and candelabra and
Oh, she's amazing.
I was just thinking that the episode of the Curse of the Revenge of the Secret of the Mummy's Tomb episode that has all the Universal monsters in it is probably was a little taste of American Werewolf in London, in the respect not just that there's a werewolf in it, but the fact that the monsters are played completely straight and scary and terrifying and dangerous, but the way that Duckula and the staff are reacting to them is almost like they don't believe that they exist. You know what I mean? They are. So it's that brilliant thing, and it's the same in Albert and Costello Meet Frankenstein. There's the monsters in that are, that they don't sort of do silly pratfalls and do things. It is Bela Lugosi. It is it is Frankenstein's monster.
Whoever's voicing the Wolfman there is doing a great Lon Chaney. So like in the mannerisms and kind of like his kind of even just his like ducky boos and getting up to date and stuff.
That's like, even in his peril, he still has time to question that. He goes, "There's no one of that name here. It's just me, Mr. Igor, and my ducky boos." Ducky boos. He's terrified, but he's got.
Well, it's the way
he's got to address that.
It's the way even like bone chilling monsters that they come across, because they do come across them frequently, can be terrified of Nanny as well. Right? It's like what is a nanny? It's just it's a big hen,
Yeah, there is nothing more terrifying than Nanny, because she is functionally immortal and invulnerable, isn't she? There is nothing that can harm her whatsoever.
It's a juggernaut.
It's ironic given that he's Count Duckula is this world's Count Dracula.
Yeah.
And he's so effete and vulnerable, you know.
Yeah, he seems to be very scared of dying. He's scared of everyone apart from Dr. Von Goosewing, which is
yeah, which is ironic because he's the one who's trying to kill him all the time, right?
Yeah, I like the way Duckula doesn't seem to really mind about that either. You know, he's just kind of it's a mild annoyance at best.
Well, to be fair, Von Goosewing is just so incompetent at it, isn't he? He's just so bad at it. It always goes wrong. I always remember that episode where I think he invents some sort of potion that inverts their personalities.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Von Goosewing becomes a vampire himself. Duckula actually becomes a good vampire at long last, like a proper vampire.
Yeah.
And Igor becomes the vampire hunter.
Oh wow!
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think I've seen that one. That's great.
And Nanny becomes smart, obviously.
I've been watching them all on YouTube, so I think me and Luca watched that one fairly recently.
It's a good one. I like that one.
There's also one with the werewolf in the woods where you don't see the werewolf, which I thought
Yes,
was
there's a pet werewolf.
That's quite creepy.
Consistently, there is a pet werewolf that's referred to but never seen.
That's a bit like the 60s Addams Family, you know, where they didn't have the budget to show a lot of the more outlandish stuff, so it was always just like this swamp monster that was described that Wednesday was out feeding and things like that, you know.
Yeah, it's almost certainly, given how many references there are in this show, that it's almost certainly a deliberate reference.
I was just to go back to Von Goosewing for a moment. I remember being a child and having absolutely no idea, first of all, what that character was about. You know, I had no idea what was going on with that character, and also the way he had this invisible friend called Heinrich. Like
Heinrich,
that, just
who never turns
who
up.
never shows up and is just there. And I remember him holding a rope for like Heinrich to hold, and me just as a child just not knowing what the fuck was going on.
Well,
you know, and just being like, what? I don't get it.
So in that unbroadcast pilot, what is meant to have happened there, and this was kind of new to me, is Goosewing is short-sighted, and Heinrich, his assistant, who we've still never seen, has left his employ. And he mistakes a mop that's standing in the corner for Heinrich, so thinks he's still around. But that just carries it in a more abstract way. That carries into every single episode. So he's just convinced. It's sort of weirdly melancholy. He's just convinced he has this sidekick and doesn't ever have a sidekick.
It's kind of sad, isn't it? Because of course Von Goosewing, he's alone a lot, so he has to just pontificate to himself. He has to monologue, doesn't he? So they need someone for him to talk to. Otherwise, he's just talking to himself.
It's a great device in a way, though, isn't it? You know.
Oh, it's great. It's great, and it is kind of puzzling a lot of the time. I remember as a kid being puzzled as to why he was saying Heinrich, and there's no one there.
Yeah.
He's talking to no one. He's talking to himself.
It's so fantastic.
My young brain couldn't work that one out, and I just didn't really get why we had this, you know, character who was trying to get Count Duckula, I guess, because in my child mind, I thought Count Duckula's a good guy. Why would anyone want to hurt him?
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I just couldn't quite put it together, but it just made it all the more fascinating. You know?
And of course, I mean, we'd probably never come across the actual Dracula lore at that point, certainly when we first saw Dracula. So for a lot of our generation, this may have been their introduction to Dracula stuff.
100%.
My Dracula intro would have been this, then maybe like Tiny Toon Adventures, and, you know, come up to the old Looney Tunes, and, you know, it would have been, well, you talked about this before, George, and Matt, actually, you know, how kids encounter, particularly of our generation, encounter the spoofs and the references and the signifiers before the real source text often, and then but get them, because the signifiers are incredibly good at outlining the actual sources. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a couple of people who saw Spaceballs before they saw Star Wars.
the superior film, you know. It's funny we talk about devices like, you know, plot devices and comedic devices before. I'd be remiss as a Doctor Who fan, a more recent Doctor Who fan, to say that, you know, that obviously the castle functions like the TARDIS.
Oh, it's so brilliant, isn't it? I don't know where that conceit comes from, but it works. There's something about, first of all, as a device for changing each episode. So I mean, they don't do this. There are actually a lot of episodes that are just set in the castle where it is in Transylvania. But it could have just, the format could have just been Duckula wants to go somewhere, or they have to go to another setting or country. So the castle moves. The castle is magical or technological or technomantic. And it moves, it teleports, and it's a great sequence, isn't it?
It's fantastic. That no, I'm not even going to try and do an impression of that noise, but
I just love seeing it. The way that it contracts and shrinks on itself, and
that little thud whenever it lands again.
Yeah, and the way it inserts itself into the landscape as though it's always been there.
But it's like it always materializes like 10 millimeters above wherever it's meant to be, so there's always that little crash, you know.
George, I'm going to have to make a note of the word technomantic, by the way, George. That's one of the coolest words I've ever heard.
Oh, you can thank Nightmare for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The principal villain, Lord Fear, was a technomancer.
Lord
So,
Fear.
kind of works, you know?
That's great. I need to watch more Nightmare.
Yeah, I'm sure George can lend you the tapes, honestly.
Oh god, well I could just certainly show you the YouTube links. They're all up.
Was that the show where they put the helmet on and you had to do
That's
that is one of my earliest childhood memories, and that show terrified me. 'Cause I was like,
absolutely, yeah.
George, I thought it was real. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I'll tell you what, it stands up. I watch it pretty much once a year, every year around this time, and it's one of the very few shows from our childhood that actually stands up to an adult viewing.
The humour's quite Duckula-esque in that, isn't it? There's a lot of kind of macabre jokes and kind of winks at the audience and characters with bizarre sidekicks, and
very much. And again, like references to genre fiction, to fantasy, to horror and whatnot. Yeah, there's tons of it.
I really want to rewatch The Demon Headmaster as well. Do you remember that that series that had it was like the giant wasp or something at the end?
Oh, that's one of the slightly later series. Yeah, I was obsessed with The Demon Headmaster.
Yeah,
there's a series with the giant wasp. I don't remember.
What was that about, David?
That's funny because that's like mid to late 90s children's television, but it's also like if mid to late 90s children's television suddenly decided to do 70s Doctor Who. I mean, the presence of a giant wasp will indicate that, you know.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that was one of my favourite things in Duckula, the moving castle, and the way he did it as well, the way he had to go into that coffin with the bulbs around.
Yeah. The fact that you just said moving castle made me realise that I'm not thinking of a very obvious thing this may have influenced. But I'm not sure. I'm not a big enough Ghibli nerd to know when Howl's Moving Castle came.
The
phrase is fantastic. I wanted to, one of the episodes that I put before you guys, and one that I was bugging Matt about years ago because it's one that we had on tape. The episode The Lost Valley. I think it's funny I've referenced Doctor Who before because any Doctor Who fans listening will be aware of a late 60s episode of Patrick Troughton one called The Mind Robber, where the TARDIS enters the land of fiction. Meets loads of crazy characters in there, and that interacts in a very meta way, for late 60s British television with fictional characters. The Lost Valley, I was rewatching it on YouTube about a year ago, and the moment because Duckula becomes entranced with seeking out this diamond mountain that he's seen in a movie, and he contests that it's a real place he can get to, and Igor, well, now he doesn't really have much of an opinion either way, but Igor thinks it's not, it's clearly nonsense, and they're both
Igor
right.
thinks everything is nonsense. Igor's such a cynic in this show.
We'll get onto Igor in a minute. I think we need to pay him his proper due. But
totally, favourite character by a country mile.
But I love it. The reason The Lost Valley, I think, is the best episode. Maybe not my favourite, but the best episode of Duckula is they turn out both to be right. It is nonsense. It isn't a real place, but Duckula can get there, and they do. And he ends up in. I think the moment when he walks out into a black and white landscape, like prehistoric landscape, and instantly, just as he's telling Igor that he was always right, he looks straight out at the audience. And it zooms out to show a cinema auditorium. It's like,
and the look on his face is just amazing.
It's incredible because then that's the first third, and then the middle third is crazy shenanigans with the sort of cave ducks that they encounter, and loads of shtick and all that sort of stuff. And then the final third of the episode where the film comes to an end and they're left stuck in the adverts.
The trailers. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness, I remember that one.
Yeah, and they're all those old school adverts. Like the restaurant down the road, the car dealership up the road, and and adverts turn out to be terrifying, life-threatening places to be stuck. And it's a bit like the Monty Python Bishop thing. They're just stuck until the next show round. They've got to wait for it to come back around.
He nearly drowns in chop suey, doesn't he?
Oh my goodness!
It's a crazy piece of television. It's amazing.
Yeah. To think that occurred on children's television in one of the blocks that was aimed at a younger audience too.
Mm-hmm.
I do love to find children's media, particularly from that era, from our childhoods, that is not condescending, that actually does treat its audience with a glimmer of respect. Because, of course, I mean, we're kind of children of Thatcherism, aren't we? Which, removed all of the restrictions. So most of our input was just toy catalogs, right? It was largely just toy catalogs. So to find something like this that is very much not that, which actually does want to make you smile, it wants to make you laugh, and it wants to feed you all of these references and homages to wider media. It's wonderful.
I'd love to have heard the conversations that took place about, like, who's this demographic. I mean, they probably just didn't have these conversations, but it's like, who is this aimed at? What's the audience? It's presumably it's a school audience, isn't it? It's like kids like 4 to 13 or something like that.
It's tailor made for after school viewing.
Yeah, after school viewing.
Well, Cosgrove Hall was kind of creating a niche and audience for itself, wasn't it? Because in a way, Duckula, because when it was made in the later 80s, it was, George, you mentioned it already, but it was trying to hang on to the Danger Mouse audience. But that was sort of an audience they'd built, or rather a taste they'd built for that.
That's
kind
funny,
of,
because that's exactly what Doreen Edwards said when I interviewed her, was that she was like, when she was asked to do the theme tune, she was like, what, as in Cosgrove, as in Danger Mouse Cosgrove Hall, and she was like, she said Duckula was like the difficult second album for them, because Danger Mouse was so popular that she thought, how can I possibly top what's already gone before? There was the feeling that Danger Mouse was such an iconic show and like massive, and everybody loved it, that Count Duckula was probably not going to be as successful, because how could it be? But then obviously it turned out to be, I mean, I suppose Danger Mouse is probably the most memorable Cosgrove Hall, but I mean, not for us. Certainly not for our generation. Maybe for the generation before, maybe. But
yes, I think so. There's something about Duckula that sticks in the mind.
Yeah.
So many of our contemporaries remember Duckula.
It's like Frasier.
Yeah,
it's like a spin-off, more successful than the original.
Oh yes, this is the Frasier to the Cheers of Danger Mouse.
There you go. That's it. Did you, George? Did you ever see Avenger Penguins, which was the next production after Count Duckula?
No, I never saw that.
Yeah, me and my friend Matt had a few drinks a few months ago, and we ended up just binging on Avenger Penguins, and it's one of the weirdest shows. Like, it's so strange.
I never saw that. I saw the one that came directly after Duckula, which was Victor and Hugo.
Oh, I never saw that.
This is the spin-off to Duckula, right?
What?
Yeah, that's right. The two villains, the two robbers who were terrible at what they did, basically.
I've never seen any of that. Oh my gosh.
I didn't see any of that, but I remember I read about it in Wikipedia. But in the book,
it's mildly diverting. It is not as successful to any degree that in any way, shape, or form as either Danger Mouse or Duckula. But it's a fun little cartoon. But that's as far as it goes. And I don't think it did as very well. I don't think it lasted for very long.
So, I mean, we've touched on some of the animation, features and limitations of Count Duckula, and indeed Cosgrove Hall's other, pretty low budget, work, particularly compared to its American contemporaries. Here's my friend Drew, who's been on the EscapeGoat podcast before and knows an awful lot about animation, telling us a little bit about that.
Brian Cosgrove and Mark Hall, the founders of Cosgrove Hall, first met while studying at Manchester Regional College of Art and Design, which is now known as Manchester Metropolitan University. My name's Drew, and I studied animation with illustration at Manchester Metropolitan University. On the day of my graduation, both Brian Cosgrove and Mark Hall received honours from the university and recognition for their outstanding contribution to animation and television. I'm going to take you through a brief history of Cosgrove Hall. We're going to have a look at some of the animation techniques used on 2D animations such as in Duckula or Danger Mouse, and then we're going to have a little think about why the studio was so successful in its heyday and what might have contributed to its eventual decline. So if your fangs are sharpened and firmly in place, let's sink our teeth in. This is Cosgrove Hall, a brief history. Both Cosgrove and Hall, having met at university, actually went on to be co-workers at Granada Television, where they predominantly produced television graphics. Both Cosgrove and Hall really loved animation, so Hall left Granada Television to found his own company, which he named Stop Frame Productions. Cosgrove would later join him, and their first projects together included some public service films and TV commercials for companies such as the TV Times. This was during the early 70s. As with many successful companies, Cosgrove Hall had really humble beginnings. They used Cosgrove's father-in-law's shed, located at the bottom of his yard, to create an animated TV series called The Magic Ball. This was from 1971 to 1972, and this really founded their love for animation and helped to hone and perfect their skills and techniques. In 1972, they produced the opening credits and graphics for the popular children's TV series Rainbow, which is something I really loved as a kid. They produced the television series Noddy in 1975. So this company is really establishing itself as having a child-friendly sort of aesthetic, which is important, really important later on down the line. In 1975, stop frame productions ceased to produce, but thanks to their earlier work, the producer of Rainbow, who worked for Thames Television, helped to create a new animation studio, which they called Cosgrove Hall Films. This is what we know and love today. This is the genesis of some of those children's animations that we still hold dear. The first series that Cosgrove Hall produced was a little animation called Cholton and the Wheelies. It was named after the suburb of Manchester where the company was based. What's interesting is Cosgrove Hall weren't really one note. They were making all kinds of things using different animation techniques, and one of their first really internationally successful 2D animated series was Danger Mouse. Cosgrove Hall made 161 episodes of Danger Mouse between 1981 and 1992, and it's in Danger Mouse that we first encounter the villain, Count Duckula. He was so popular amongst American audiences that executive producers, don't quote me, some TV bigwigs decided that he deserved his own spin-off, and I'm glad they did, because that was one of the most popular 2D animated TV series that Cosgrove Hall produced. Cosgrove Hall weren't just working in 2 dimensions though. For instance, in 1983 they created an adaptation of the classic story A Wind in the Willows, and they did this using puppets and stop frame animation. I've seen these puppets firsthand. They're really incredibly detailed, and for me they are the definitive versions of the characters that we all know and love. They somehow personify the characters really well. They still have the animalistic textures and details, and yet they're moved in such an artful and characterful way. This is true animation mastery, and it's no wonder that that prompted a 52 episode TV series off the back of it. Another definitive adaptation for me is their feature-length animation of the BFG. Roald Dahl himself said this was his favourite adaptation of one of his stories, and it's not hard to see why. It's terrifying in places and kind of, thrilling, enthralling, whimsical, magical. There's just something about it, and it's every part of the production. It's the sound, it's the cohesion between the animation and background. It's just, for me, one of the most perfect low-budget films that has ever been produced. So Cosgrove Hall have really established themselves as powerhouses in children's entertainment and animation in general. I'm going to reel off a few TV series that they worked on. Some of these things were things which they picked up which might have already been established, but they're names that you're going to recognise. There's things like Bill and Ben, which I know was one of those watch with mother type shows back in the black and white days, but they had a crack at that in 2001 to 2002. Andy Pandy, again, another remake, Engie Benji. We have Postman Pat. This is classic sort of animation or puppetry that they are reviving, and I think this was placed into their hands because they are, a sure bet. They have an incredible pedigree in this kind of thing. There's a long list of popular children's TV shows which Cosgrove Hall had a credit in making, but ones which stand out to me, which you might recognise, include Pocoyo, Fifi and the Flower Tops, The Avenger Penguins, Noddy's Adventures in Toyland, and Okie Doke. This is through the 90s and into the early 2000s. For me personally, one of the most interesting things that Cosgrove Hall have had a hand in making is an animated music video for DJ and artist Mr. Scruff. Mr. Scruff has this distinct art style that he calls potato style that he uses for his cover art, and Cosgrove Hall have adapted that and breathed life into it for one of his animated music videos. The two work really well together. Cosgrove Hall have really captured the essence of this potato style. From the mid-70s, throughout the 80s and 90s, and even into the early 2000s, Cosgrove Hall was revered as one of the best animation studios in Europe. However, in the mid-2000s, numbers really started to dwindle, and Cosgrove Hall was actually making losses. So, Granada Television decided to move Cosgrove Hall in-house, which ended their time in Cholton cum Hardy. I think it's worth saying that Chorlton partly owes its bohemian identity to the fact that Cosgrove Hall brought in a lot of artists. Chorlton now hosts things like the Chorlton Arts Festival and is home to a lot of homegrown shops and people peddling vintage wares and things like that. It's got a really artsy vibe to it, and that eclecticism is in part thanks to the work that Cosgrove Hall was providing for local artists. So now I'd like to talk to you about method. How were these animations made? I'm going to be focusing on the 2D animations such as Duckula. The first thing you'd start with is a script, and from here the actors and narrators would read from a script, and that would be recorded onto some kind of audio film. After that audio is put together, you move on to storyboards. This works like sequential artwork comic strips. You're effectively showing a brief description through pictures of what's happening in the scene. Once these storyboards are established, they're passed on to the artists in charge of the animation. These artists will most likely figure out where the keyframes lie, and then animate everything in between. So what you want to do is figure out how long you want something to take between A and B. Imagine your character needs to look from left to right. You can either do that really quickly, and so there will be fewer frames between point A and point B, and your point A and point B will be key frames. They will be key points in that animation. Or it could happen really slowly, in which case you just put more drawings between point A and point B. These drawings are most likely done on pieces of paper which have pegs at the bottom. These pegs are sort of like an animation standard, kind of like a hole punch, and they align with the Xerox machines and some of the cells which get painted later on. So once these lines are cleaned up, they are scanned into a Xerox machine. This is one of the animation techniques, not necessarily what they would do for modern day animations or even animations sort of like earlier on. But certainly during Cosgrove's Hall time, they used the Xerox machine to scan some of these cleaned up lines. They then get printed straight onto acetate. This kind of skips a step. It was something which Walt Disney Animation Studios pioneered. Back in the olden days, animators would have to do the cleanup and then draw straight onto the acetate. So this Xerox machine really helped to speed up the process. Acetate is clear and durable, so this acetate then gets passed on to the paint and trace department, who are responsible for colouring each of the cells. I don't have exact figures on how many people would be working on each section, but taking something like the character animation, there wouldn't just be one person responsible. There might be somebody who's really good at it, and there might be people who sort of stand out as being really good at, say, animating Duckula. So they might get sort of prominent scenes to do, but typically you'd probably have several people working on various scenes throughout. The same with the cellular shading process. You'd have several people responsible for colouring in these cells which are printed off on the Xerox machine. As Cosgrove Hall had a stop motion pedigree as well as a 2D animation pedigree, they would create some 3D characters even when they're making 2D animations. These were used for references, and they could even be posable. So you would have like a little character like Penfold who would be made out of foam rubber, and you could kind of move him into the position that you needed him. And there would also be model sheets which give a rough idea of what he looks like from the left, from the right, from above, and all of these techniques were employed to really help give that character life and 3 dimensions. I say 3 dimensions, it's still a 2-dimensional film, but you know, when a character moves, if you have a camera that's kind of panning around them in any way, if they sort of turn to face, you've still got to think about what they look like from all angles. So apparently in Danger Mouse, they had roughly 150 to 160 backgrounds in any one episode. Some of these backgrounds will probably be recycled and reused in other episodes. But it's interesting, Cosgrove Hall has this really distinct style of backgrounds, and I think it works really well with their characters. It's kind of gilded, but also very comic booky. They're often quite dark, tonally, and they have quite a lot of line work in the background to kind of pick out various details. Some animations don't bother with that, they give a vague impression of what the environment is, and in that respect what they can do is kind of manipulate the environment a bit more. They can move the environment. In things like Danger Mouse and Duckula, the environments tend to stay still, but they're so three-dimensional, they've got such depth to them, they don't really need to move. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But first I want to get to the end of what this animation process is. So now it's time to put this animation together. Let's, for the sake of the argument, say that we are wanting to animate Count Duckula doing his iconic shrug that we see in the credit sequence. So imagine the castle is the background. That goes on to what's called a capture plate first. Capture plate's nothing special, it's just essentially a camera rig pointing down. So you put your background on that first. On top of that, you will put the first frame. This will be Duckula, with his hands down. You will capture that for 2 frames. I noticed this in the documentary about the making of Danger Mouse. It looks like they're working on 12 frames a second. Film typically captures 24 frames a second. But to cut down on animation, you can capture the same bit of film twice, and then only have to animate 12 frames a second. So once you've got that first frame captured, you want to remove the frame, keep the background in place, and put your second cell down. This will be Duckula with a slight movement, maybe slightly raising his shoulders. I don't know how many frames it takes to make Count Duckula shrug, just giving you an example here. So you do that, you repeat the process until you have however many seconds of animation, and there you have it. You've got this character sort of like coming together in a movement. I don't want to downplay how painstaking this process is. Even though you have teams of people working on various aspects of it, it still takes an incredibly long time. So one of the figures that they mentioned in this making of documentary was it takes 2 weeks to make one episode of Danger Mouse. One episode of Danger Mouse was about 10 minutes. So if you're looking at working weeks, it takes about a day to make 1 minute of animation. I imagine with bigger teams, obviously you could have various people working on various aspects, but still it's a very, very long and patient process. So let's imagine that we've elapsed 2 weeks, we're fed up of drawing vampire ducks, and we've got to a point where we can now synchronize the audio. In the traditional ways of making animation, as Cosgrove Hall did in its golden age, you would have a physical film that you would have to synchronize with a physical audio film. I don't quite understand the process of this, I've got to admit, but going off this documentary I saw, it seemed like there is a magnetic tape which aligns with the physical film cells. So the most important thing really is to make sure that your keyframe animations align with this. If you want a character to talk, in the keyframe stage, in the very early stages of making the animation, you need to make sure that your animation's lips are synchronized to that audio. I imagine animators would listen to the audio tracks over and over and over again, maybe even mime them out. I've seen people like Nick Park of Aardman just mimicking what he wants his Creature Comforts characters to say and do, really exaggerating their features. And this helps sort of the animator get into the mindset of what they're saying, what the character's saying. So now you have Duckula all ready to go and it's been released into the world. What made Duckula so popular? What made Cosgrove Hall so popular? For me, I don't think it's any one particular thing. I think it's, a story of the sum of all parts. All of these things worked really well together. You've got really good voice actors giving the animators something really good to work with from the beginning. You've got really nicely gilded backgrounds, but also the backgrounds are really full of depth and rich, and they've got this iconic kind of Cosgrove Hall look to them. I think having appreciation for different disciplines of animation also gives rise to that cross-pollination effect. For instance, having the ability to create puppets, having made maquettes and these foam characters, gives you that ability to pose them and then draw them two-dimensionally, as if you're drawing a life model. I think that definitely has a hand in making these things really characterful and really sort of beautifully animated. It also allows for more dynamic use of your perspective. You can kind of look at the characters from all kinds of angles, and if you take an example like Duckula, they do that a lot. They play with different sort of close-ups on the characters, and then things will pan away, and then you'll be as if you're a spider on the wall in the castle looking down on Igor and Duckula having an argument about him supposed to be drinking his blood or whatever. This kind of stuff has a real sort of like decent filmic quality to it, even though it's just a kid's cartoon. It's got really, really gold standard work going into it. I think high quality is true of all Cosgrove Hall's productions. I imagine it's the atmosphere they've created. I imagine, it would have been a joy to work there. And I know some people who did work there, and they testify that, they're still kind of mates with some of the people that they used to work alongside. They had a really good time there. It's not, although it's a pressurized environment, although you have a lot of pressure to create these beautiful things, it's still enjoyable. You're still doing something which brings joy and creates joy in the process. So I think that's part of the reason why it's successful. So if these animations are really good, and they still live up today, they still look great today, why did Cosgrove Hall sort of take a bit of a decline? I think that owes a lot to children's TV in general taking a decline, and it's still in a bit of a decline. And I put that partly down to the fact that there were dedicated channels for children's TV. When I was a kid, you'd either wake up on a Saturday morning, run downstairs and watch cartoons in your jammies, eating your favourite sugary cereal, or it would be something that you got home from school waiting to see, absolutely chomping at the bit to throw the TV on and catch your favourite show. Of course, nowadays we have subscription services as well. And that's not to say that animation studios, production companies can't exist within those subscription services. There's a pretty big subscription service which is based off the back of the well-famous Disney animation studios. But there's just something about this handcrafted quality TV that we don't really see anymore. I think it takes too long, it's too expensive, and you can't really afford to be making it sort of like as frequently as people are eating it up. I think that is the reason why Cosgrove Hall sort of took a bit of a downward turn, sadly. The building where Cosgrove Hall had their headquarters in Chorlton was torn down about a decade ago to make way for a housing development. Brian Cosgrove became an executive producer of CHF Entertainment, and so was Hall. But unfortunately, Mark Hall lost his life and his battle with cancer at the age of 75 on the 18th of November 2011. CHF Entertainment are still actively working on a number of television series, so there is a little bit of hope that part of the Cosgrove Hall legacy lives on and will continue. I just hope that maybe the way that they used to embrace modern technology and the way that they used to embrace forward thinking and even pioneer new ways of looking at animation, I'm hoping that that will live on and that we'll get some real quality children's animation, TV, motion graphics, whatever it is in the near future.
Yeah, there's a lot of lore in Duckula, which is in a nice way, not in a making it overcomplicated way. Just in, as I was saying, all that stuff about his vampire past and his ancestors, and I love that in that unbroadcast pilot episode that they didn't end up broadcasting till series 3 for some reason. I guess they didn't hit a deadline or something, and he just bring something out of storage. I know how that feels. But they show that Duckula's still becoming used to his teleportation skills, and
yes,
he's still used to being a vampire,
They do actually recreate what was originally going to be the pilot in season 3, don't they?
Yeah.
And in that episode, things are different. The animation is slightly different. The relationships aren't quite settled yet. And Duckula isn't used to the fact that he's this incarnation of Duckula. I mean, that's another interesting implication in the lore, the fact that Duckula's been alive many times before this and has been a monster, right? Igor knows this because Igor's been his attendant for many incarnations, and he's very, 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 very weary and annoyed at this incarnation.
Well, that's another Doctor Who thing, isn't it? Because it's not just he's the heir, it's the continuance, he's the rebirth, he's in a new mold,
That's right. He's the new version. He's the latest incumbent of the name, right? But an Igor, I love Igor's shtick. I love it to bits. He's so droll, and the fact that he so wants Duckula to be what he was born to be, right? He wants him to be a monster. He wants him to be a vampire. He wants him to be the scourge of the innocent, and he tries so hard to get him there.
Well, despite our varying positionalities, or maybe because of them, can we unanimously declare Igor a queer icon for the ages? I mean, I think he's. I think his sheer exasperation probably alone qualifies him.
I think we should declare Count Duckula a vegetarian pioneer, actually. And I never thought of the connection between, Cholton being such a sort of, vegetarian community and having Count Duckula. I don't know if there was any sort of conscious thought of that in the late 80s, but
in its own bizarre way, you're absolutely right. I cannot think of another character in any media aimed at our age range that was openly a vegetarian. I just cannot.
Openly veggie and not ashamed.
Yeah, I mean,
the only other character I can think of where I remember in the 90s watching it for the first time and being like, that's really unusual that this person said this, was the girl in Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
she says, I happen to be a vegetarian. And I remember being like, that's weird. I remember thinking, no, just vegetables? What? So it was funny how attitudes have changed, because as a kid in the 90s, I remember thinking that was really exotic.
Yeah. Well, it kind of was, and in Duckula they play it for laughs, obviously, and it's the kind of exaggerated vegetarianism to make kids laugh, where he literally just eats vegetables. He eats broccoli, eats carrot sandwiches, and watercress smoothies and things like. It's not the kind of because I'm a vegetarian and went vegetarian when I was about 18, probably because of Duckula. Let's face it. And I have a terribly unhealthy, as Matt can attest, I have a terrible unhealthy diet. Not all vegetarians are very very healthy. We eat a lot of chips. It's incredible. I mean, I think Igor is so great for many reasons, isn't he? Firstly, it sort of goes without saying that almost every voice performance in Duckula is just brilliant.
Yeah,
I mean, full
down the line. All of the little characters who only occur for one episode are all fantastic.
Yeah, the villagers.
I love the world's first vampire is my favourite. They have the world's first vampire. How do I know what makes sense?
Yeah, that's right. It sounds like he's like Chorley or something, doesn't he?
Yeah, so good.
He goes, why are you out in the daytime? And he's like, you only come out at night. He goes, night. Oh yes, that's the dark bit, isn't it? So good. It's so brilliant, and so northern as well, so bloody northern.
Awesome. Great northern tinge to it. I mean, but I think the actor who plays Igor is just. That's such an amazingly iconic performance, and he does. It is that exasperation, and he's so droll, and also he gets his moments of amusement as well. Usually at Duckula's misfortune or something.
Or Nanny when she's being not particularly clever. He can be a little bit snide towards Nanny sometimes, and he has been known to sort of take the mick out of her.
Another time when Igor can be happy is when he thinks that Duckula has gone bad. He thinks that he's become.
And he never hasn't. There's that episode of Dark and Stormy Night when the statue comes to life for reasons. Because of reasons, and of course, it's a statue of Duckula as he's meant to be. It's Duckula as the vampire, and it acts like that. So you've got this wonderful slapstick thing where Igor is kind of being summoned by one Duckula, told to do one one thing,
Yeah.
and then summoned by the real Duckula and told to do another.
Yeah, they literally do the mirror routine. They do the Groucho Marx mirror routine in front of an open doorway, don't they? Duckula.
They do, yeah. And Igor inexplicably can't tell the difference between a stone statue and a vegetarian duck. But yeah, there you go.
One of my favourite line readings of Igor is when in the Return of the Curse of the Wolfman, etc., when he finds Dr. Franken-Duckula's laboratory, and he revives the experiment that he was obviously helping that version of Duckula with, and then it flees, it bursts out of the room and runs off going, Daddy. And Igor just comes into the doorway looking guilty, and he just goes, "Oh, I wonder if I've done the right thing."
That is brilliant.
It's just so great.
Bad, of course, but evil with it.
Because he's kind of inept as well. They're all part of the same sort of inept gang. And it's funny,
absolutely.
You were talking about Snyder's to Nanny. That he is, and he certainly has pokes a lot of fun at her expense and her stupidity. But they're also a little protective unit, aren't they? And they're also dedicated to protecting Duckula.
Oh yeah, I mean, even though he's really exasperated by this version of Duckula, he is loyal to a fault, isn't he? I mean, he never questions him, even when he's doing something incredibly silly or dangerous. He just gets on with it,
Yeah, definitely, and it's the ultimate sort of blind leading the blind, isn't it?
He's also probably the most quintessentially British character in the sense that he's just totally put upon and just gets on with it, just does it, without question, just gets on with it.
Did you both? I know me and Matt watched this as a kid. Did you get around to? You mentioned Basil Fawlty before. Did you get around to watching the Hard Luck Hotel episode?
That's the one where there is actually a parody of Basil Fawlty in it, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. And there's someone going for fully for their best Basil Fawlty, and it's this kind of like sort of uppity kind of falcon or something who runs the hotel. But that's got a great dynamic that I'd completely forgotten about, where Nanny and Igor come to stay at the hotel, and Duckula by this point has been press ganged into basically paying for his stay there and running all the hotel.
Being the bellboy.
Yeah, exactly. And so you've got this great thing where he's serving Igor and Nanny, and then they're pushing him around and actually being kind of harsh to him.
Which he probably deserves. Let's face it, because he is a little bit of a narcissist, isn't he? This version. He expects a lot of them. He really does. I mean, there are episodes where Igor's reading him bedtime stories and tucking him in and getting him snacks and all sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, he's so relatable to a kid, isn't he? And he's quite a warts and all portrayal of a entitled kid character without being not lovable, I suppose.
Because he's not mean. He's not mean-spirited. There's something kind of tortured at the heart of this version of Duckula, because he does want out, doesn't he? He doesn't want to be a vampire. He doesn't want to be a Transylvanian count. There are episodes where he's desperate to get rid of the castle, or he's desperate to get rid of everything in the castle because he just wants to go.
I like the way he cuts deals with Igor as well. There's that episode where he's like, "Could you not just patrol the ramparts a little?" He's like, "All right, I'll patrol the ramparts." He's not going for biting the virgins, but he will patrol the ramparts a little bit to make Igor happy.
They meet halfway, so Igor will stop nagging him. He will go and do a mildly vampiric thing.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was talking about queer in terms of Igor, but there is that sort of passing element as well. Isn't there? He will, for the sake almost like when your parents are visiting. You'll go. Yes, I'll patrol the ramparts today. I'll patrol the ramparts.
Well, there is an episode where he has to do that, isn't there? Where his ancestors turn up. There's like a gathering of the clan, and he is very keenly aware that they find out he's a vegetarian, they'll just kill him. So he has to pretend to be a vampire, and of course, the only person who can coach him, and that is Igor, because Igor knows what the previous incarnations were like.
One of my favourite episodes is the Wax Museum episode. The duplicates of all three of them.
Oh, it's so good.
To rob the Bank of England, and they sort of have that stutter so that you can tell that the Bank of England.
Such obvious robots. Yeah, it's amazing.
And I watched that episode with Luca about a couple of weeks ago. That's my son. And it was that thing of he was the same as I was when I was a kid, because when Robot Nanny and Robot Igor would come round the corner, Luca would just look at me and go, "What's going on?" And he was like, I don't quite understand, what's going on here and everything. And I remember having those feelings of just like, just being slightly detached from the plot, not really knowing, but still really, really enjoying it. So it was great. And what was it, Dr. Matrix? Is it Matarix? Dr. Matarix.
That's one of maybe many where you've got Hawkeye Soames and Dr. Potson as well.
Oh yes.
I think the definitive version of Holmes and Watson, actually, to this day. I think they get to the heart of that relationship quite well. Matt, when you were on Luca and his sort of viewership of it, because I was lucky enough to be around at your house recently, and we watched an episode, the one where they go on that time machine fairground ride with Luca. And I saw firsthand Luca enjoying that, including, like, do you remember he made us rewind? There was a bit like a pratfall bit where Duckula gets slammed in the face with a door, basically, and he actually made us rewind it like 3 times. You had to say that's enough now.
We had to move on. Yeah, three's your limit.
So he's and I never thought this wouldn't be the case, but he's a real proof that, like, kids in the present day can engage with this kind of low budget, in many senses aesthetically outdated, kind of British animation, isn't he?
Well, we've been playing Mario All Stars for about a year now, and he's not made any. He's not got sick. He's not got tired of it, because again, it's all he knows. We've not got there. We're getting a Nintendo Switch this Christmas, and then that's probably the SNES out the window. But no, he loves it. He absolutely loves it, and I think he can sense my enthusiasm as well. Because obviously I said this is the greatest show, and it's really great. And he even whenever we put it on, he even sings the Thames. The Thames logo at the beginning, so he goes da 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 at the beginning, which is really sweet.
That's amazing, because that's so culturally distant from everything Luca knows. That's so crazy.
From anything, yeah.
This is obviously a wider topic, but just before we get back to Duckula, do you think Luca's at the age now where he gets that some of the things you're showing him are older things?
That's an interesting question. I think only because I've told him. I think. Yeah. Although, having said that, I think that when we watch clips of Mario Odyssey and Mario 64, like on the YouTube, I think he does sometimes say, I don't know what came first. It's like the chicken or the egg. I don't know if he realised it himself, or if it's me who's told him that. But he knows the difference between 2D and 3D and things like that. So he'll say that's 2D, this is 3D. That's chicken and egg. That I'm not really sure. I mean, he knows, but I don't know if he knows because of me.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. I suppose I with Duckula, I'd constantly say me and Uncle David used to watch this, in the 90s.
Yeah, of course.
So back in the day when we were kids, I'd always say, like, when we were your age, we used to watch this.
But isn't it wonderful that because of, like, the availability of this media now, the fact that there are like extant archives of everything that was around when we were children, that like his generation can have all of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of it. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
It's the way when we were teenagers, the world of music was opened up just like that via Napster and its various, successors. That's what visual media is to them now.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I love that. I love the fact that they have that breadth.
So, Matt, I believe you went on as a sort of roving reporter for this podcast. And for posterity, you went to interview the marvelous Doreen Edwards. You made a reference to her earlier. Would you like to tell the audience what you talked about?
Absolutely. So she was remarkably easy to track down, actually. It was a real pipe dream to get this interview done in the first place. We just basically thought, how wonderful would it be to have a long-form interview with her and talk about Count Duckula and her music career. And but we just didn't think we'd be able to find her. So we put a shout-out on the Cholton Facebook group. And we said, does anybody know if Doreen Edwards lives in Cholton or if she's available for an interview? And then a friend of mine from, since I was about 14 years old said, why are you looking for my mum? And it was one of those, amazing life moments. And I said, would she be interested in speaking to us? And she did. So me and Doreen sat down on a rainy Tuesday in the summer and had an hour and a half conversation that was just absolutely brilliant. And there's a little musical surprise at the end for you, which was one of the best, the highlights of my life so far.
Yeah, and I should say I'll be playing an excerpt from this interview, the sort of more Duckula pertinent bits, but I think you're planning to put the whole interview online, aren't you, Matt, at some point?
Yeah, so I'm just going to put the interview long form on our channel with a short sort of intro on there so people can enjoy the whole thing.
And I should say I've heard the whole interview, and she talks also fascinatingly about the Manchester music scene, of which she was a part at the time in the early 90s, and she has a lot of interesting stuff to say. I mean, the Duckula, for our purposes, the Duckula is the pertinent bit, but it's not the half of it. So yeah, it's a really, I recommend it. When you do put that online, I'll link to the full thing as well.
So the purpose of this interview was originally to talk purely about Doreen's involvement in having sang the Count Duckula theme tune, but obviously we found a much more interesting subject to talk about, which was her career and life to this point. But yeah, for people who don't know, Doreen Edwards sang the wonderful Count Duckula theme tune, which for I think kids of my generation, adored this program. It was just fantastic, and being from Chorlton. And, every time I walked to school at Oswald Road, I would see Cosgrove Hall films, and I was aware, even from such a young age, that this was made here, like where I lived, which of all the places in all the world was just kind of fantastic. So,
oh my gosh,
yeah.
Listen to this, folks. That's the casing of a
VHS tape.
There it is, opening and closing.
Old school.
Count Duckula.
Yeah.
Mysteries of the Wax Museum. Dun, dun, dun. That's astonishing.
Yeah, I bet you've not seen one of those in a while. A cassette for a start, but
not
Count
at
Duckula.
all.
So we've taught Distant Cousins. We've kind of been through that. This is
Ruby Wax.
Ruby Wax.
Additional voices by Ruby Wax.
Wow, you share the bill with Ruby Wax. How's that?
That's so cool.
I don't remember. Who did she play? I don't remember that.
I don't know, but it's here.
Was it a guest
Additional
spot, maybe?
voices, maybe.
Yeah. She might not have been a regular character. It might have been more like a guest spot or something.
Wow.
People Google that. You'll have to Google that and find out who Ruby Wax played on Count Duckula.
Oh, wow. I'd love to, because she's a very funny lady.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's great. And
Thank you.
Oh, I bet you've probably not seen that in decades, have you?
No, that's the first time
You've ever
because
seen
I've always thought it was TV.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it to be on a VHS.
Yeah, it was big. It was really big. I mean, we used to watch it all the time. Obviously it was one of the Cosgrove Hall cartoons, but you were a fan of Danger Mouse? Did you know Danger Mouse?
Chorlton and the Wheelies.
Yes, yeah.
I can't remember when we were after that.
Yeah.
But where do you want to begin?
Well, I suppose from Distant Cousins, which is the band that you'll probably be in when this opportunity came around.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 89, I think, because obviously the cartoon was released 88, 89. So can you just tell us a bit about how you got involved and how that happened?
Well, I got involved because I can't remember now if it's Chris Paul who was managing Distant Cousins at the time. And I can't remember exactly how it came about, but I was asked if I could do this session.
Yeah.
Moonraker Studios.
Wow.
In Longsight.
Longsight.
So it was a very popular studio anyway for local bands recording there. Sadly, oh gosh, is it Colin Goddard? I hope I've got your name right, Sweet Pea, and may the Lord bless you. But he ran the studio, and his sound engineer was Lee Monteverdi.
Yeah.
Now, I can't remember if he was on the session, but I know a couple of the Cosgrove Hall people were there, but I can't remember exactly who they were. So I was asked to come and sing, and David Jason wasn't there.
Did you ever meet him at any point?
I met him once.
You did? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and that was after the recording. I'm not sure if they were doing like a grand opening.
Yeah.
And it was this place called the Jabberwocky.
Oh.
Which is called the Queen of Hearts, but I call it the Queen of Tarts. Queen of Hearts, just because it felt really good to say it. Yeah. But anyway.
Where was that? Is that
right, do you know Fallowfield?
Yeah.
Fallowfield, the junction of...
was it the main crossroads with the church on the corner? So you're coming from Chorlton.
Going straight down Wilbraham Road. And then it's on the corner at the cross junction there.
Yeah.
So it's like... student land.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was a grand opening and he was at the bar and I think we just exchange a few words of like, hi, how are you? That was great. And that was it.
Wow.
But he, and then I think we also, the Oscar Bernhardts at the time were like a jazz band. And they were very popular because there was a club called Mulberry's that they used to play in as well. So they ended up doing Mulberry's as well as the Jabberwocky. And it was like a restaurant, a very sort of lovely place, grand staircase leading up to like a level.
Yeah.
But that's where we played.
Yeah.
So it was very short and brief.
Yeah.
But David Jason, if you are listening, I would like a signed Duckula copy of whatever photograph you have, as well as your gorgeous good self, and just say 2 does, lots of love from Jason.
That'd be amazing. I will get him to listen. We'll get him. I mean,
but other than that, it was something completely out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Not done anything like that before. And
were you asked to write it, or was it all written for you?
It was already sorted.
Written,
all I was doing was singing it.
So you come in and they show you the sides and they say, this is the lyrics, and they play you the demo or whatever?
So it was already recorded, and so there were the additional voices that they'd put on the track as well. And so all I learnt was the main melody and then the lyrics to go with that, and then... but it was just like great fun doing it.
It sounds quite hard to sing. It's like quite high, and it's also obviously it's very, because a lot of the songs, the Distant Cousin stuff, is quite low and melodic and kind of slow paced. But this is like pretty soulful, isn't it? Like
I think that's the thing that they wanted, something with a bit of bite and a bit of growl.
It's really good,
and something different, because Danger Mouse is very straight. It's sort of Danger Mouse, Danger Mouse.
Operatic.
I'm so sorry, I'm doing a terrible version, but I really like that vocal because it was just specifically geared for that. For Danger Mouse. So it suited that very well. Yeah. Whereas with Duckula, it was more like a vegetarian duck. Okay.
What's this all about?
Mike Harding, who wrote it, I'm not sure if he added any other vocals to the track as well. But I know that it didn't take very long to do, a couple of hours. And they seemed quite happy with it. Yeah. And
you were quite well directed. They kind of just told you what they wanted, and you just did it, got it done.
Just followed their brief.
Yeah.
And then, when you think, right, I've done that, and nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it does.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, I think for my mum, it was like, because she was a foster carer, and the kids, pick them up from school, and then they'd come back to the house and sit down with their jam butties and their orange juice and children's TV. Yeah. And then it's like, I can't remember if they said, "Oh, it's going to be released." It was just it was just on. It was just on, and
what a moment.
And then I thought, it's like, I recognise that voice. Oh my God, it's me!
See, that's the tone that it's sang in. It's kind of up there. You know? There's a bloke, sorry to interrupt you, called Barry Clayton, who does the intro, the Castle Duckula.
Yeah.
And then you come in. Did you ever meet or hear from Barry Clayton at all?
No.
He did. He's very famous for having that baritone voice.
Okay.
And he does things, and he's famous for. There's a song about Iron Maiden called "Number of the Beast."
Okay.
Let he who have understanding reckon the number of the beast, and then the song starts. So it does that similar kind of intro thing.
Right. Okay.
So you never had any dealings
No, because
with
I think
him,
it was. I think either parts were already recorded, so it wasn't like we're all in the studio doing our bits. We all did it separately. I'm saying I did my part separately. Yeah. But it was so... at the time, you just think, oh, it's just... it's something different. It's a learning experience, and you do it, and you're enjoying it, and everybody's saying, "Oh, that's great. Can you do another take of this? And can you do another take of that?"
Just layering them up.
And then it's you just think, "Yeah, great. I'll go again. Oh, I didn't like that. Can I go again, please?" And stuff like that. But as I said, oh my God, that's me.
Yeah.
And then what made it even better still was seeing my name going up on the credits. It was just like, Mom, can you see that? That's my name going up on the credits. Well, so that was like, I thought, right, a job done.
Yeah.
But not actually thinking that there were fans out there that enjoyed the show.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, who's going to be watching a vegetarian duck?
Yeah, this ain't going to catch on. It's so smart as well. It was one of these things that me and my family, when you watch something with your parents and they get it, and it's very rare as a kid that your parents get something that you're into. But it's like The Simpsons that had my parents' approval, and they got the jokes. And Count Duckula was the same because there were so many jokes for adults in it as well. That it was this affirmation where it's like we watched it together and they really enjoyed it. And it's just great having you in my home because we listen to your voice. Probably every day for years. We used to watch this all the time. So it's just so special for me to have you in the house. So is there any? I mean, you're famous for this particular theme, but is there any other like TV show, cartoon, adult, whatever it may be, that you really love?
Right, here we go. I've got a list.
Oh wow, what's written a list?
So definitely the Magic Roundabout.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah.
Definitely Magic Roundabout. Hector's House.
I don't know that one.
Which is Windy Miller? Anybody from Not a Day Over Fabulous who remembers Windy Miller? Because that was gorgeous, the theme tune to that. Rainbow. The Avengers, Persuaders, Starsky and Hutch, The Sweeney. If anybody remembers that. And The Archers.
Oh, I still love The Archers. Dun, 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 dun.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
And then the final one is any musical that comes from Mandalorian or Star Wars. I have to get those in because they're my...
did actually notice that on your WhatsApp was the Stormtrooper helmet. Yeah, no. So you're a big Star Wars geek then.
I certainly love it. But otherwise, no, I think I've been very lucky to have been in the industry for this long, and I'd like to thank everybody and anybody who I've ever come into contact with in helping me become the wonderful, not a day of a fabulous person that I am. And thank you all very much, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, Doreen. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can you remember any of the lyrics to the song? I'm not going to ask you to sing it. I'd love to ask you to sing it, but I'm not going to ask you. But can you remember? Could you do? You couldn't do the whole thing from start to finish.
No, right? But I could if I had another year.
Another year.
In the heart of Transylvania, in the heart of Transylvania, there's nothing I'll say yet.
Duckula. Oh my God.
He can't fight beast a man, 'cause he's a vegetarian, and there's nothing got to plan for Duckula. So watch out for the, beware of the, and say you'll never meet with Duckula.
Count Duckula. Oh my gosh, Doreen. My life is complete. I can die now.
Without the G&T.
Wow, thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome. You're more than...
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was...
It's in there then. It's in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, cut.
I said I talk a little bit about me and Matt's relationship with Cosgrove Hall, the animation studio that made Duckula and Danger Mouse, Avenger Penguins, as we've covered, and many other things, including The Wind in the Willows, George, which I know you've spoken about.
Yeah.
If you go right back, they were responsible in the late 70s for Chorlton and the Wheelies, which is named after the suburb where we grew up and where Cosgrove Hall was based.
Oh, wow.
Of Chorlton.
That's right.
So that's nice. I remember when I was a kid, probably just maybe about Luca's age, slightly older maybe, they had an open day. I was talking about it, like, Cosgrove Hall's animation studios being like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. They used to do open days, and they'd invite local kids, and maybe kids from further afield as well, in to see some of their process and see some of their workshops and things like that. And I remember seeing at the time they were working on a sort of one-off British TV movie called The Fool of the World and the Flying Ship, which was, ambitious stop motion at the time.
My goodness, I remember that. Yes, the adaptation of the Russian folktale. Yeah,
it was probably on at Christmas 1991 or something like that.
Yeah,
something along that. But
I remember it very well.
Too long.
It's a beautiful piece of work.
It was lovely. When I went, I'm sure you can get that online. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Oh yes, you can. I've seen it. I've watched it again.
Amazing. Well, when I went along, they probably just made that because I think I knew about it, and they had some of the sets, that they were using little figures on. But of course, the thing I was most impressed by was that they'd hired some probably locally underemployed actor to play Duckula. So there's a Polaroid of me with a man-sized Count Duckula standing next to me, just like looking steadfast at this red brick wall of this animation studio. So it was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I mean, Matt, I meant to mention, obviously one of the things they did again with David Jason around about this time was the version of the BFG.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
It's only in this conversation that I'm realizing how much they actually did. Like listing all these features as well that they did, and because I mean, for a lot of people, that's still the definitive BFG.
Yeah,
I mean, the Spielberg one kind of disappeared without a trace, really. But they did so much.
Well, the Cosgrove and Hall one has got much more about it. I found. I mean, it's the more recent one isn't a terrible film or adaptation by any stretch of the imagination, but the Cosgrove and Hall one does things aesthetically that are just fascinating. The transition into the Giant's world, for example, which is this weird Doctor Who TARDIS tunnel style, like metaphysical state. It's so weird.
Yeah, I remember that liquid and with all the bubbles in it just being so beautifully animated.
I was
making looking really
terrified by the giants in that. The scale
they are so frightening. The individual giants, barring obviously the BFG himself, are all horrific. All of them.
I mean, we don't even have time, George, to touch on the adaptation of Truckers, the Pratchett book that they did. Because that was, I primarily knew the books of those, but I did watch it. Obviously, I watched the Cosgrove Hall Truckers. That's something I wasn't going to miss. That's a charming show as well.
My good, they did so much more than most people remember, because for most people it's Duckula, Danger Mouse, and maybe one or two Wind in the Willows, obviously. That's kind of it, isn't it? That's what most people remember, I think. But they've actually got a huge back catalogue, most of which is worth exploring.
And we walked past this place every day on the way to school. It was literally on our school route. We would walk past it, and we'd be aware, I think. That was the other thing, that we were very curious about it, and we were always aware. And it was such a, the front of it was just kind of like brown brick with blacked out windows. Yeah. So you couldn't see anything, but you thought the amount of magic that was going on inside there.
And now it's stuff, unfortunately.
Now it's flats. Yeah. There was also, on a sound note, because I'm a sound editor, George, so on a sound note, there was actually a post-production company in there that was called Hullabaloo, and they recorded all the voices there as well.
Oh, wow.
So, that was a company that, I can't say they recorded all the voices there for everything, but it was definitely a post-production company in there where they did the audio editing.
Which is one of the more significant parts of Cosgrove and Hall, of course, because, the animation was obviously done as efficiently as it possibly could, because they didn't have mega budgets,
No.
And that results in very interesting and distinct animation, but it's the voice work that sells it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of this stuff has moved to Altrincham now. Like the Altrincham in Manchester has, a really, basically there's so many stop motion studios there and all these things. So I think that Cosgrove Hall and Hullabaloo Studios kind of got amalgamated into I think Factory and another few. Anyway, there's plenty.
They kind of got cannibalized by Granada, didn't they? They kind of got, for bits of them, they got rapidly downsized and then moved into other bits. And
there's something almost blasphemous about that, isn't there? Especially to our generation, it's a desecration that Cosgrove and Halls don't still exist.
It was just it was a charmingly sort of unique golden age, of this very amazing stuff achieved on such small budget. I'd like to give you just both the brief closing thoughts on Count Duckula and its charm, and whether you'd recommend people to watch it. George, if you want to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that sticks in my mind. There's no doubt. And very specifically as well, it's one of those rare pieces of media where, even before my most recent rewatch, which is the first time I've rewatched it since I was a kid, that they are so clear. They're so incredibly clear. The voices, the visuals, the music, everything is so incredibly clear. But rewatching it now, I would highly recommend, not only those of us who are children, but those who are coming to it for the first time, go and watch it. You will enjoy it. You will find something in it to latch onto. It stands up to an adult viewing remarkably well. It made me chuckle like a madman throughout, and I will be continue. I'll watch it all now. I will absolutely watch the whole thing, and I'm sure enjoy every moment of it all over again.
It's quite the testimony, and Matt.
I'd say, yeah, just hear David Jason as you've never heard him since. Let's put it that way. And it just ditto, yeah, what George said. I think that, show it to children. It can be scary, it can be heavy, can be violent in some places, but it's just like wonderful entertainment, and the level that I don't think it's just nostalgic to say that it doesn't really exist anymore, this kind of children's entertainment. So yeah, check it out. My son loves it, and there's nothing wrong with him yet.
That's the best way to look at it. Well, Matt, would you like to plug what you'd like to plug?
Yeah, so me and my friend Mike do a podcast called Matt and Mike Pull Focus. We are hosted by Acast, and we're available on Spotify and YouTube and the Acast player as well. I've just recorded the next episode of the Daddy Day podcast, which is a child development podcast that I do with my son, where we talk about his days in school, like his computer gaming, his interests, and he's just had a baby sister who is now 4 weeks old. So we're going to talk about the new arrival as well. So subscribe to those on Spotify and YouTube, and yeah, that's it.
George, would you like to tell everyone what you get up to, where to find you, that kind of thing?
Sure. So, as mentioned earlier, I do a fair bit of the old writing. Got quite a few bits and pieces published out there at the moment. You can find links to those over at strangeplaygrounds.com. Most recently, both volumes of Born in Blood short story collections that are interlinked by an overarching mythology. You can find both of those over at perpetualmotionmachinepublications.com. And I also recently had a short story published in a collection called The Book of Queer Saints, an anthology, The Book of Queer Saints, which I'm really, really pleased with. Again, they're sort of your usual suspects. You can get it in many, many bookstores. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc., etc. In terms of my podcast work and my online work, you can find me over at Exaggerated Elegy on YouTube. And if you'd just like to chat, then you can come over to Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. God knows how long that will last, because I don't know, Twitter might implode by the, I don't know, who knows. It's all up for grabs, isn't it? Who knows at this point?
Yes, well, the only thing certain about that is that we'll probably have something to say about it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I just don't know at this point. I mean,
Yeah, on that bombshell. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining us, and me and George will be continuing on, but say goodbye, Matt.
Goodbye, Matt.
Fantastic.
How do you like that, Igor? Greatest detective brain in
My
the...
lord.
Ooh, and all the time it was...
castle, my lord.
What's the castle got to do with this?
Nothing, my lord.
Then will you stop interrupting me when I... What about the castle?
Gone, my lord.
Gone? What do you mean, where?
To Transylvania, my lord.
What? How do you make that out, Igor?
Elementary, my dear master.
Amazing, Igor. I don't know how you do it. What do you mean?
It is way past dawn, Eastern Transylvanian Standard Time.
You mean she's gone home? Without us?
Precisely, my lord.
But that's... I mean, it's the stupid, idiotic, bundling, useless...
And so, as London is shaken to its foundations by the sound of terrible, tortured Transylvanian screams, we bid farewell to this fair city and say, good night out there, whatever you are.
If you're feeling all you kind of could be your man up with Duckula. If your knees go and your teeth go, maybe you bumped into Duckula. He flies through the night looking for a bite, but he's back home by daylight. Duckula. If you sort of, or you're a little, it's certain you run into
So, having said farewell to Matt there, I'm still here with George, and I suppose, said this is kind of certainly an autumn special, maybe a little bit of an unofficial post-Halloween special. And I wanted to touch on something that I've seen George write about, I've seen him opine about, I think on Twitter and elsewhere, and he's a big fan of, and something that I'm a big fan of too. And one of the reasons we let Matt go, apart from his busy schedule, is that I don't think he's watched the latest instalment of this thing, which has recently been on Channel 4. And I am talking about the thing, not the thing, the work that is Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
That's a very good way of describing it, actually, the work that is, because it's hard to call it anything else, isn't it? I mean, you come to try and define what this phenomena is to other people, and it's almost impossible, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it couldn't really have come into being in any other decade.
No, there is no way this thing could exist except now, right? Yeah. There is no way, because it relies so heavily upon context, upon a historical exposure to media, understanding of things like British children's media, for example. If you don't understand that, and if you don't understand even like the history of British television and advertising and the laws that apply to that, you don't understand Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. And alongside that, horror media as well.
Well, you'd say it could only exist in that time and context and with those that information behind it, but also it could only exist in the sense that people who know what we're talking about know that Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared started as a cult YouTube series in the sort of early to mid 2010s, and in that form it put out 6 episodes, I believe I'm correct.
6 episodes that have become absolutely iconic. I mean, they've kind of redefined how narrative and media works on that platform, on YouTube and online in general. There's been a whole slew of various different kinds of series and projects since then, most of which ape Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared in some way, shape or form, or try to replicate whatever bizarre formula it has going on, because it's very difficult to pin down, isn't it? Particularly with the original series, it's very hard to pin down what the formula actually is, because it's not beholden to one of the most wonderful things about the original Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is that it's not beholden to anyone. It doesn't have any vast studio giving it money or providing its platform, so it could be and do whatever it liked. It could say whatever it liked, and boy does it.
Yeah,
I mean, it goes for the throat, doesn't it? It really is a vicious work when you start to analyze it, what it says about not only about British children's media, but also what it comments upon with regards to intergenerational conflict and impositions. It's not a kind work, is it?
Yeah. Well, I remember when we talked about Duckula before, and you said something about Duckula, teaching you sort of cultural lessons, but not by yelling at you and hammering them into you. And I was like, yeah, we're going to get to that. It's funny, isn't it? Because, Peter Jackson's early movies, and, if you talk to anyone about Meet the Feebles, say, you tend to sort of like fatuously describe it as, the Muppets on crack or something like that. That's another puppet-based work, and there's obviously a lot more going on there, as there is here. But maybe for people who haven't seen Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, firstly, I mean, it's all the YouTube stuff's freely available online, and you can find all that still. And the channel, particularly if you live in the UK, but I'm sure there are other routes, you can get it via all 4 the Channel 4 online platform. It's all this first, maybe only, I don't know, series of longer Channel 4 episodes has been on now and is available online.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most interesting things. I was really surprised to see it picked up for what is effectively a traditional broadcast network. But if it was going to be any of them in the UK, it was going to be Channel 4, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is the kind of material that Channel 4 originally made its name with, the deviant stuff, the interesting, the self-effacing stuff. I mean, the nature of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is that it excoriates broadcast television, right? That's its nature. That's one of its core themes. And yet here it is on that platform.
Well, it excoriates, what you traditionally could call Reithian values. And I guess Channel 4 has some of the same seeming sort of societal values baked into its charter, doesn't it?
It's fascinating.
Educating, informing, steering impressionable minds in the direction of being, solid adults. It's funny, in the same way I described that Meet the Feebles that way. I suppose not telling the whole picture way of describing Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared to people who haven't seen it would be, rainbow bits and anxiety dream. That's
pretty much, yeah. That's pretty much it. It's like Rainbow meets existential crisis, right?
Yeah, and obviously a lot of people tend to bring up David Lynch, which is probably an overused analogy, but I think there's actually a bit more truth to that in Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared than when it's usually thrown around, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the nature of its storytelling is fairly Lynchian, yeah. And sincerely so, not in the sense that everything that's vaguely weird is it's like David Lynch. No, this actually uses like the same almost like style of editing and the surreal juxtapositions of images, the way that things don't make chronological sense or narrative sense. It's all here.
Yeah.
Within these 6 to 10 minute episodes.
Yeah. Jarring sounds, sudden sort of tonal transformations,
images, just imagery, just thrown at the screen, just thrown at you. But it's not as in David Lynch films, it's not arbitrary. Yeah. There is something here. There is and of course there are many YouTube videos out there autopsying, dissecting Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Yeah, it has its own lore, doesn't it? It has its own, quite coded sort of symbolism and theories behind it. And the creators have been extremely, ever since the YouTube shorts have been extremely canny and creative about utilizing that for maximum sort of viewer engagement, and it's an enigma. They made it as an enigma, and they made it into an enigma.
It's very clever, actually, because it's the kind of symbolic storytelling. It's basically metaphorical, where it demands engagement in order to get the most out of it. So you want to know. You want to know, why is there an image of this? Why do these numbers keep recurring? Why do these dates keep recurring? And of course, those numbers and dates, often in works like this, they are kind of arbitrary. They can mean any number of things, whereas here they seem to be rather specific when you actually do bolt them down. Their dates referring to things like the changing of laws with regards to advertising in children's television in the UK and that kind of thing. There is a very definite commentary upon commercialism and the way we turn children into consumers under the guise of educating them, and so on and so forth. It's a really dark, unpleasant show, and it's kind of pointing the finger not only systemically but at previous generations, for not insulating us against this, or for directly exposing us to this,
which I think is very much the mood of our generation and the one below it. I think,
Absolutely.
I think in some ways we're feeding off the mood of the generation immediately below us.
I think you're right. I think it's absolutely true. I mean, I was discussing this with friends recently. I think that even for those of us who have a fairly decent relationship with our parents, which I do by and large, there is still a gulf between our generations that I think is abyssal. I think it's irreconcilable. I think at this point we basically live on different worlds. We perceive different things, we operate in different ways, and we want different things from reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think as with everyone, when they get into discussing something they like so much and that they see so much in, we're probably not making it sound very funny.
No, but it is, isn't it? I mean, it's gallows. It is, the humor is there, but it's also gallows. I mean, there are moments of real humor and there are moments of real darkness in this. And when I say real darkness, I mean I would slap warning labels on this, like content warning for a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff.
Well, I admire work that can make me think so carefully and be and have such a disturbing impact on me, but can make me laugh consistently, because it's not like there are laugh lines. It's like most of it's fine. I think particularly in the shorts, especially the better ones, like I mean the one where we haven't even really mentioned them yet. The one where red guy, yellow guy, and the duck meet the computer, which is I think that's my favorite. That's my favorite of them. And I think it's perfect, and it's become one of the things I've quoted the most over the last sort of 5 years at people. And there's lines, like when they interrupt the computer doing its sort of its pedagogical spiel and touch it, And it just does that auto-tune, don't touch me!
Yeah, and it disrupts reality around them. Like the whole screen flickers and the computer itself like becomes slightly demonic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, more than slightly, yeah. But it's kind of, every line in that makes me laugh, and it sort of, everyone quotes the digital style thing, and that comes at the one of the bits where it's also becoming the trippiest and the most disturbing. But there's laugh lines. The digital style keeps coming back around. It keeps hitting that, and because it's repetitious and ridiculously trivial, it keeps making you laugh.
Right. It is. It hits that really clever medium point between comedy and horror, where it's simultaneously disturbing and funny, and it's utterly brilliant in that regard. Like the precision of it, because it has to be precise. These episodes are only the maximum is like 10 minutes, right? The absolute maximum is 10 minutes, so it has to be precise. It's like a short story, and everything is like, from the most minor detail, like those very strange insert shots where you see Roy under the table in one frame, and if you're not looking for it, you're not going to see him. All the little things in the background that suggest previous episodes or what is going to come later.
Yeah, well, that's some of that. You mentioned Lynch before, so that's like Bob in Twin Peaks kind of level stuff.
Yeah,
like
it's brilliant. It's utterly brilliant. I mean, the conception of the show, and the fact that this stuff has been considered and has been placed in just the most perfect way to compose the shot. I mean, it's wonderful. Every single scene is a puzzle.
Wow, look!
I'm a computer. I'm a computery guy. Everything made out of buttons and wires. I'd like to show you inside my digital life. Inside my mind there is a digital mind.
Oh, maybe you could help us answer this question. What is the biggest
Clever. I'm very clevery guy.
Wow.
Count to a 50 in the blink of my eye and print a picture. And then I tell you the time. Help you to find something you're wanting to find. No, it's easy to be a clever smart boy like me if you just do it all digitally.
Wow, I'd like to be as smart as a computer. Actually, we already have a computer.
Great news! Now, before we begin our journey, I just need to get some information from you. What's your name? Where do you live? What do you like to eat?
I live in my house.
Spaghetti! Well, my name is...
Great news! Now just a few more questions and we'll be on our way.
Wait a second.
What's your favourite colour?
Stop talking.
Do you like cows or goat's milk?
Be
Do you
quiet.
have brown hair? What is your blood type? Are you allergic
Shut
to...
up!
Don't touch me!
What?
What do you think of then? Because we were talking about the shorts quite a lot there. Obviously, part of the reason we talk about this now is because of the Channel 4 translation. And it is a sort of translation, I think. And I was thinking, I mentioned the three central characters who they even kind of, in the Channel 4 version, they enshrine with their own little theme tune at the beginning about how there is three of them, One thing they've started to remind me of by translating them into this longer, kind of standard sitcom length, at least, of episode, and they do a lot more open with sitcom in this, I think, is there's quite a lot of young ones in it as well.
Yeah,
it's the drawing on a sitcom, the young ones is their progenitor, I suppose, in some way.
It's completely anarchic, isn't it? I mean, that's what they've done with the TV show version. It's just throwing out the rules of television. It's almost like inverting itself. So much of the time you cannot predict where it's going to go or what it's going to do from moment to moment, and that makes it fascinating. Because so little television is like that these days. It's so formulaic, it's so predictable. Everything's following a template that's derived from a template that's derived from a template that's derived from a template. It's almost Baudrillardian, isn't it? We're operating in hyper reality at this point. But this show reminds us of that in a very keen and exquisite way. I mean, this one goes even further with like the metaphysics. The original show is, for all of its weirdness, is kind of grounded in an assumption of a reality that is physical and that functions. This one is more meta.
Yeah, well, I like it. I obviously love it from the way we talk about it. The new Channel 4 shows, I'm still processing a little bit, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you could criticize it for is that it didn't really need to be done in a way. It didn't really need to be continued. And the thing they're doing with the Channel 4 series is they're sort of doing the shorts again with this expanded space. And they are, you talk about the metaphysics of it, they're kind of doing what they did with the shorts again, where their world strips away, or like bits of the illusion around them, or hemming them in strip away. And I'll come back to you in a minute on like the elements of that you think were worth doing, or have been newly illuminating. But going back to the sitcom thing, it's interesting to watch them try to do types of sitcom episode, isn't it? Like they all get a job at the factory.
Yes,
I think it's literally the first one.
They all get in the car and go for a ride.
The trip,
right?
yeah.
Which I think is my favorite actually of the Channel 4 episodes. Simply because it is such a standard sitcom situation that is kind of funny, but devolves into horror.
Yeah.
Like very, very quickly and arguably more profoundly than most of the other episodes.
Well, it's got a drawing on other British comedic archetypes for it, or just archetypes in general, like, and predecessors. In that episode, particularly, you start to see I'm quite a big fan of The Prisoner. You start to see bits of. It's funny actually. We were talking an hour ago about Duckula trying to desperately escape his surroundings, his role in life and stuff like that. That's the episode where they're most sort of overtly trying to get out, isn't it?
Out of this situation. I mean, that's one of the most interesting things. This is a derivation of the original show on YouTube as well, where the characters are aware, or sort of like becoming aware of the artifice of their reality. So they are trapped in the format of a children's television show like Rainbow, where everything is very codified. And Red Guy says this quite a lot, where we do the same things every single day. We don't do anything different. This is our world, and he wants to go and do something different. But the rules of this reality will not allow for that. And if you try to transgress, then by God, you're going to be punished, right? Which is exactly what happens.
Yeah, it's what happens. And I think we talked about sort of sweet and codependent relationships before with Duckula, Nanny, and Igor, and it's funny how they also are like that, because they bicker all the time. The three main ones, they bicker all the time, and they have, there's the yellow guy who is probably the least intelligent one, although to be intelligent in their space, what does that even mean?
What does it mean, right?
I mean, he functions as well as they do, and and then obviously the last episode of the Channel 4 run, does the thing you were talking about before again with Duckula, of making the dumb characters smart,
which is a standard trope, right? It's a standard trope of this kind of show that happens all the time in children's media. There's always a story where the one who is not as smart becomes smart for reasons. In this episode, what I really like about what they do with that is that it promises illumination and then refuses to give it to you. It is deliberately frustrating for both the characters and for the audience, because it teases with what the audience, certainly those who have come over from the YouTube show, have been hankering for forever, which is an explanation,
resolution of the law, or
and then it literally shreds it in front of you. It gives it to you. It says, here it is. We have it. It's here. And then it literally shreds it in front of you.
And the characters themselves are the ones who do it,
Right. And that is deliberate. That is totally deliberate. It's kind of a clever thing for a show like this to do. And also kind of brave that it's deliberately frustrating its own audience and saying, we're not going to give you what you want. And in fact, you're the audience. So you don't get to tell us what you want.
Well, it's
given.
It's all about, getting back to Leviathan. It's all about that sort of, revelation that you then, either reject or accept, or just a revelation that can't be maintained, that kind of psychotropic revelation.
I mean, I also took it as a commentary on the nature of creators and audiences as well. And what's going on now, of course, in wider media. So you have this situation now because of the internet and the things like Twitter and social media. Creators are connected to their audiences in ways that they never have been before. audiences can react like on the moment to whatever creators put out, and that is influencing what creators are doing, certainly like commercial creators, movie studios and whatnot, and that is not necessarily a good thing. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Neil Gaiman actually, or it may have been Terry Pratchett, who said that no, it wasn't, it was Harlan Ellison. It was Harlan Ellison. He said if audiences knew what they should be having, they'd be the writer, they'd be the creator, and they're not.
Yeah.
So they don't get to tell us what they want.
Yeah, which could be heard as a very snobbish statement, but I think it just means that, you know, that creator is tied into their creation. You know,
but it's also saying, it's a way of saying that there's a purity that comes from an uncolored vision. There's something beautiful that comes from that. When you get something that's decided by committee, that's edited by test audience, you get something that's diluted, that's ultimately never going to have the purity of something that is just out of someone's head.
Yeah, which is not the same as a wholesale rejection of fan fiction. I think that's it's a subtle distinction there. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more saying that creators should not be influenced in that way by their audiences. You know, the audiences shouldn't have any. Like a really good example was the Sonic the Hedgehog film. You know, which we all know the original design for the Sonic the Hedgehog was awful. It was garbage, right? And as a result of the fan lashback, they went back and changed the whole thing. They actually redid the whole thing. Now, in a way, yes, the redone Sonic the Hedgehog looks a million times better, but it sets a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
It sets a very dangerous precedent where, I mean, okay, that's just aesthetic. That's fine. It's just aesthetic. But what about when they start reacting to things that are ideological or that are narrative? Then you've got a problem.
Well, it's why there's something sort of perversely glorious about Cats coming out, wasn't it? Because just the fact that it emerged and it was allowed to be terribly, you know, like eye-gougingly awful, but also just laughable. It came out and it was clearly laughable, and also the things they tried to do to insulate against audience laughter made it more laughable. You know, all the digital retouching and stuff, and it was just wonderful. It somehow escaped the factory. And you know, it didn't live long, but it was sort of glorious that it did escape. You know, and
just let it be awful. You know, that's the lesson. Just let it be awful. Let it be out there. You know, I think that it's a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing for creators of any kind to be responding in that way to audiences and allowing that to influence what they're creating. And that's what that's what I got from this anyway, as a commentary. Is they're basically saying, no, we're not going to give you what you want because you don't know what you love. What you love is the mystery. What you love is the theorizing. What you love is your own engagement with it, your own imagination working. If we give you an answer, all of that goes away. The intensity of the relationship dies in your own head. So no, we're going to tease you, and then we're going to destroy it in front of you and just let you go. And then, of course, it just sparks off entirely new mysteries. What does that mean? Why did they do that? It starts off new speculations, right?
Well, I like the way the YouTube Don't Hug Me I'm Scared and the Channel 4 Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, let's say they just leave it at that one series, kind of exist as these two. You could debate whether they're canon to each other. It just says that this even has canon, because they kind of do that revelation thing again, and they both end in a sort of a different kind of reset for the character.
Absolutely, and are saying different things. Of course, there are different theses behind each show. I mean, the commentary about media and whatnot is kind of there, but it's much more subtextual in the Channel 4 show. It's not as overt as it is here, as it is in the original show. But no, I just found it fascinating that it even exists on that platform. That in and of itself throws up a whole multitude of questions, of course, some of which are really problematic for the show itself. Like, it spent those original 6 episodes criticizing broadcast media, traditional broadcast media, and now it's on traditional broadcast media. And it has sponsorship by one of these monolithic giants that it was attempting to slay. And there are problematics there.
Yeah, it has adverts in the middle of it, for example. If you watch it on broadcast, it has adverts in the middle of it.
Well, exactly that. It's got adverts in the middle of it, which is something that they steadfastly refused, because they were offered money, by bigger studios when the original show came out, and they refused it because they wanted to keep the purity of it. I mean, I do think they've managed to create something very interesting within those parameters, within those restrictions.
Yeah.
The new Channel 4 show is a fascinating piece in and of itself. But like you, I'm still digesting. I'm not sure what I feel about it yet. There are things I definitely liked about it, that's for sure.
Oh, very much. I think one thing where it suffers maybe is that and I think this is more straightforward than all this interpretive stuff. I'm not sure the songs are great.
No, the songs maybe aren't as catchy as they were in the original show.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a change of personnel, or I don't want to be mean to any of the creators involved, but maybe they just had those good ones in them, and they're not in the same mood, 5 years on or whatever. But it kind of, I noticed, as someone who watches quite a lot of musicals and stuff, you can always tell when you watch one with maybe 2 or 3 songs. There's a good hit rate, if you come away knowing them, essentially. And I don't yet feel that way about the Channel 4 ones, but maybe they are just longer. They're just, there's less time to rewatch them. You can't just cycle them until they're part of your brain architecture.
Yes, maybe that's it. But I do remember the songs from all 6 of the original episodes, but I don't think I remember any from the Channel 4 show.
They seem to be less of the point to the extent that I was like, I'm not sure if you should even put these in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the ones in the original series all have a purpose, don't they? They're kind of parodying the kinds of songs, the didactic educational songs that you find in shows like Rainbow and children's media. And very often they are where the horror happens too.
Yeah.
They escalate.
And intensifies,
and intensifies as it goes on. I mean, the one that always sticks in my mind from the original series is the one where they're talking about healthy eating.
Oh, yeah.
And it just goes bananas, right? There's no consistency at all.
Yeah.
In the thing, everything makes your teeth go grey. Everything. It's just, it's so bizarre.
The moral lessons themselves start to collapse, don't they?
Well, yeah, and that in and of itself is a commentary, right? It's a commentary on how arbitrary and simplistic and pointless these didactic lessons are, and underneath there's commercialism. It's selling you stuff.
Well, there's the one where Yellow Guy is taken away from his friends on that picnic they're on, where he starts to be taught all about love by that kind of
and it's actually a commentary on like religious indoctrination in children's shows, or even just like not just specifically religious but ideological indoctrination in children's shows.
And dreams of monogamy and stuff, and stuff like that as well. There's he starts to talk about his special one and things like that.
It's disturbing.
But that is set to a memorable song as well. It's kind of so that's something where I think they're shooting for a recreation of the original and maybe shouldn't even have tried.
Yeah, I think that's true too. I think one of the things I certainly got from the Channel 4 show is it isn't as focused as the original show. The original show has a very distinct thesis, and that is consistent throughout. The Channel 4 shows are more standalone until the last one.
And arguably the penultimate one, the travel one you're talking about,
there isn't a clear thematic through line in these shows, and maybe that's simply because of the format and because they are longer. It's a bit more difficult to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think at the end of the penultimate one, again, spoilers for Don't Hug, I'm Scared, the Channel 4 version. I think at the end of the travel one that you talk about, at the end, I think is there a human hand that puts their car back where it belongs?
I believe there is. Yes, it resets it, doesn't it? Everything is reset like it's like a Cosgrove Hall anime, like an Aardman animation. All the bits and pieces go back to where they were,
back in their play box, and it's kind of it's arguable. I think you're certainly meant to think that might be the human figure that you meet in the attic in the finale.
I think that's a fair assumption. Yeah, I mean there is this whole thing about creators and the created, and authority and whatnot. There is, but it doesn't really go anywhere in this season, and deliberately so. It's not going to give you any answers, because it doesn't want you to have them.
That struck me as Lynchian as well, though, and going right back to, one of my favorite David Lynch movies is, a bit of a hipster answer, I suppose, is still Eraserhead, where you've got kind of, I guess, the purest Lynch nightmare stuff, and you've got. But you've got these figures like the burned man with the lever and like the lady in the radiator, who are these kind of weird, unexplained visions / deities, and they seem to be drawing on some of that kind of stuff,
Yeah, That's exactly it. I mean, the lady in the upper floor. I mean, she even says she's not that isn't the highest floor anyway. So it may be like an infinite regress. There may be creators all the way up and down.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe that's the truth of it. I mean, in that regard, there's almost like a Dantean element to it, isn't there? There's like a hellish element to it.
But there, or at least the layers you see in that, all seem to be specifically getting at levels of education.
Yeah. Oh God, that makes it even worse, doesn't it? I could almost take the Dantean hell over that, the Inferno over that.
Well, that's where it becomes really savage, isn't it? Because or more savage, because it's easy to poke fun at, from an ideological point of view, or just from a stylistic point of view, an aesthetic point of view, or just, isn't this naff? It's easy to poke fun on all those levels, and more at children's media and at children's educational media, particularly. But those bits, those other flaws that the temporarily intelligent yellow guy goes up to, they seem to be poking fun at secondary education and tertiary education.
Yeah, they do. I mean, that's consistent from the original series, of course. It seems that if there is a through line, if there is a consistency, it's the place of children in our society. That seems to be what they're talking about consistently. And again, that is one of the sacred cows. That is something you don't comment upon, certainly in media that's being broadcast on a mainstream broadcast channel. You don't do it. No, children are this and that's it. That we don't talk about it. We certainly don't talk about the rights of children or anything like that, or children even as human beings. There is still this sort of Victorian sense in the UK that children are functionaries or inconveniences. They operate as we determine that they are. Well, we saw it just recently, didn't we? We saw Keir Starmer talking to Mumsnet, of all things, anti-trans, horrible place, about how children shouldn't be making decisions for themselves without their parents' input, which to LGBTQ children, of course, is absolute garbage.
And has also a lot of dark implications.
It's very, very dangerous, right? It's very dangerous indeed. But people will see that and think that makes sense, because that's the pervasive assumption in society. That is.
Well, we all know we were allowed to make fewer decisions as children.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are decisions I wouldn't want 10-year-old children making. But I mean, the implications that I saw that piece of news too. The implications that has, if you really expand it outwards, is
pretty horrifying, especially for LGBTQ youth. It's a horrifying thing. I mean, we have to make decisions away from our parents a lot of the time, because that's just the way it is. That's the way society is set up. That's the way history and tradition have set up our structures and our systems. And
choices of preference are amongst the most primal of those, aren't they? I mean,
exactly.
we've been talking about art a lot on this podcast, for example, art that we like, art that we chose to a degree.
Yeah, exactly that.
And that's taste. That's not too different from sexuality in some ways. That's the things we choose to love.
And again, this notion that children are lesser, that children are not strictly human with regards to civil rights. That is exactly what Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is commenting upon. Not as strongly in the Channel 4 season, that's for sure, which is probably inevitable because of the platform and the format. But yeah, it is interesting. It is a really interesting piece of work. And if people find the YouTube series via this, great. All good, There are certainly worse things that you could be feeding your brain.
Completely agree. Well, on that very apt note, late Halloween to everyone. Happy autumn, happy fall, happy whatever you're celebrating at the moment. Happy just nearly being at the end of a mad year.
2022, wow, it will be remembered.
Yeah, it's another one, I'm afraid, for the history books.
I'm getting sick of them in the UK, quite frankly. Can we just have a year where nothing happens, please?
Oh, that sounds glorious, doesn't it? Yeah.
Doesn't it? That sounds like halcyon days, doesn't it, at this point?
Yeah, on that, that's goodbye from the EscapeGoat podcast for 2022, and that's this one-off special. But we are planning to be back in the new year in 2023. And we'll be talking about some other stuff then that should be really fun. So, to all our special ones, goodbye.
Bye-bye, guys.
I don't get it. How can it be if I'm sitting at home but I'm inside the screen?
But you're not you. You're your digital you. Virtually real, but controlled by real you. But if he's not quite real, then I'm not real too. And you're not real you is inside your real you.
Oh wow, how amazing and interesting too. But in this digital world, what can we do? What can we do?
Oh, good question. Well, it's up to you. In the digital world, there's over 3 things to do.
Wow, look at pie chart.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Wow, look at bar graph.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Wow, look at line graph.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Wow, look at oblong.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Wow, look, nothing.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Nothing.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
Nothing.
Digital style. Do a digital dancing. Hey, this is fun. Digital dancing. Hey, this is fun.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.